All right, everyone, welcome to, I'll call the TAC to order. We haven't had one in a while, so I'll just go through and do a quick roll call here. Steve Bicking.
Here.
Mike Von Bergen.
Here.
And Al Schmidt. Thomas, you're filling in for him as the alternate, okay? Mike Warner.
Here.
Jody McCarthy.
Here.
Brian Valesky.
Here.
Bruce Meyer.
Here.
Gabe Powers.
Here.
Alex Strack.
Here.
Vince Mosca. Dave Kraft is here.
Here.
Dave. Okay. Spring Duffy. We've got Ryan Bieber here.
Here.
Ernest Varga. Darren Olson.
Here.
And then Dave Watkins or Daniel Tunyon. Not here, okay. All right, so next item on the agenda, we had minutes approval. To be honest, I don't even know what the last minutes are. I'm not sure if I'm supposed to technically say that, but we'll just go ahead to any public comment. We had 2 people sign in. Any public comment at this time? No? Okay. So then, moving forward, election of officers. So I think I'll just open this up since Steve Bicking was the last chairman. We had a different vice chairman. I'll just kind of open this up to the committee for discussion or who you want to become chairman to move forward. The chairman would be elected every January, essentially, so whoever wants to start.
If Steve will take the chairmanship again, I nominate Steve, but that's up to Steve.
I second that.
Second that.
You're a train? That's not a train, that's a bus.
Yeah, I can do it again.
Okay, so I think we have to have everybody vote in the affirmative. So all the yeses or ayes?
Aye.
Any nays? Okay, ayes have it. So Steve Bicking is your TAC chairman, and now we need a vice chairman. So anybody wanting to nominate or discussions?
Does Steve get to appoint his second in command?
In the past, we nominated somebody different. That person's no longer here, so it would be up to, if anybody wants to throw their name out as vice chairman, then, you know, we could go that way. I don't think it's, or if somebody wants to nominate somebody to see if they would like to do it, I don't know.
What are the expectations?
Just essentially to run the meetings if I'm not available.
Are there any other stuff that you do outside of the meetings?
I usually attend the Stormwater Commission meetings, and then I attend the TAC meetings. And the vice chairman typically wasn't attending the Stormwater Commission meetings. Would you like to?
You sound interested, Mike.
Since you inquired.
Since you're in.
I nominate Michael Warner.
Okay, there we go.
Second.
All right, so Michael Warner for vice chair. The yeses, please?
Yeah.
Aye.
Any nays? Okay, the ayes have it. Mike is the vice chair.
Thank you.
All right.
Good job, Mike.
So, Steve, if you want to go through, or I can just keep
I think just keep going.
Okay.
I don't think we have any old business at this point, so
Well, if there was, I'm not aware of it.
it's not in the
It's been-
minutes.
Exactly. So new business, so the first thing would be putting together a schedule for you folks. In the agenda, what I did, this is just a suggestion. In the past, what has been, this is the second Tuesday of every month. It's free in terms of there aren't any other conflicts with any other committees or anything like that. But I don't know for you guys if potentially it is or not. So the rooms would be available during that time. Previously, the TAC met after the SMC. However, I know that for a lot of you, you were potentially sitting around, and I don't think that's the most efficient use of your time. And I can't guarantee that an SMC would end at any particular time. So I guess I'll just open it up to, now I know I have the March 12th date on here, which would probably have to get modified because I know a lot of you, including myself, will probably be at the IAFSM conference. So I don't think that's gonna work for us. So we can modify the March date to something, but this was just kind of a starter point for discussion to see if this worked. Also, if you guys prefer afternoons, a lot of these rooms would be available. A lot of the committee meetings, board meetings usually happen in the mornings. So if an afternoon slot is preferable, we can kind of choose whatever date might work best. So throwing it out to all of you to see what the preference is, or if anybody has any engagements, you know, if you want to start the discussion on it, feel free.
I like the mornings.
Mornings.
Traffic
I like the
perspective.
afternoons.
With the schedule you proposed, it happens today, we're meeting at 9:30. I noticed this says 9 o'clock.
Yeah,
We're looking at 9, not 9:30.
We can change it to, if you guys prefer, 8. You know, it's really your call or whatever the consensus comes out from you guys. If you guys prefer 9:30, we can do 9:30. So the time and the dates, it's all up for.
If it's gonna be Tuesdays, 9:30 would be better for me. I have a weekly Tuesday morning meeting every week.
Okay. Well, does Tuesday work for everyone? Is that getting a lot of?
I'm excited about the Tuesdays rather than Thursdays.
Okay, so then, if this, Brian, you said afternoons, do you want to
I
make it?
was just
Okay.
being it doesn't matter.
All right, so what we can do then, Alex, 9:30 would be preferable?
If we're only changing it for me, like I can be here at 9, but I'd probably walk in a little late.
Okay,
I would prefer 9:30 too.
9:30,
Yeah.
okay.
We're changing it for him, not for me.
All right.
For the
we
vice
can do
chair.
the-
Exactly.
Morning.
We can do the 9:30. I mean, does anyone want to do Thursdays to meet after SMC? But, you know, like I said, the notion from that was you guys would be waiting around potentially, so I don't know that anybody wants to do that.
Yeah, some of the meetings went long in the past and we had to wait for them to, so we could get in the room.
So, okay.
And it will again be, as in the past, if there's nothing on the agenda or nothing to meet, we simply will have a mass email that says, no meeting this month.
Yeah,
Yes.
So it'll be the same procedure. Okay, thank you.
that would be the idea. Okay, so,
And the idea is to make this meeting before the SMC meeting.
yeah, so SMC would meet every Thursday. So you guys would basically have an opportunity to have 2 meetings in prior to the next SMC. So the thought was to do it sometime during the second week, because then you can get back in relatively quick after that SMC meets. And then you would have one more meeting prior to anything that we would want to get back to the SMC for their eyes or whatever that might be.
I think that works good, because in the past, sometimes we had things we wanted to contemplate and discuss intermittently, and then we had to meet after the SMC, so we weren't able to get that information to SMC until 2 of their meetings passed.
Okay. That was the idea behind this. So then the only thing would be this March 12th date, that we would need to modify and do something different for March specifically. Otherwise, I don't know that we'd have a quorum with the amount of people that are likely gonna be at that conference. So if you guys want to, I can pull up a calendar here.
Considering the proximity to this meeting, I mean, we're already in the latter half of February. Is the March 12th going to be necessary?
That's another consideration. We can just eliminate the March 12th date. If we wanted to, and then if we want for now, we can say March 12th is off. And as we go through the agenda, if we're running out of time, or you guys feel like, yeah, let's actually meet back up in March again, then we can come up with a meeting, I suppose. I don't see an issue with coming back to it. So does everyone want to proceed in that fashion? Just eliminate the March date for now? Yes. Sound good? Okay. All right, well, we'll finalize this, we'll finalize this calendar then. We'll remove the March date and we'll do a 9:30 a.m. start time. All right. Do we need a vote on that? Do I need a vote on that?
Yeah, why don't we
Okay.
just,
So if somebody wants to make the motion,
I'll make a motion to accept the calendar as presented, eliminating March 12th for 9:30 a.m.
Second.
all right?
all in favor?
All in favor?
Aye. Opposed? Okay.
That was your chance, Brian.
So the next item on the agenda would be the MS4 changes. I think a lot of you were present, or at least are familiar with the MS4 when we gave the presentation at the SMC meeting through Scott. And we highlighted, or he highlighted what it is, what some of the components involved are with it. McHenry County is an MS4 community due to our population size. So this also would extend to our municipalities that would meet that population density or higher population threshold. So one of the highlighted items that we were looking, and I should preface this with that the MS4 changes are probably coming here over the next few weeks. So we don't have an official document from IEPA yet that says here's the new standards and whatnot. But what we've put in the agenda is coming from an IEPA representative that they were graciously kind enough to put together to say, here's some of the changes that most likely are going to happen. And one of those was related to soil erosion control. And so I just highlighted that section here for all of us. And one of the items that's number 5 there indicates that we have to have training for contractors, developers, and other involved construction process members. There are site inspections related to the permittees and things of that nature. So I included the portion of the SMO that talks about the soil erosion control right now for the county. And for the most part, unless it's over an acre of disturbance, which then We partner with SWCD. We do require them to have a certified inspector and all of that as part of it, but most of our soil erosion control inspections are completed by staff. And that, the way that we operate currently is we don't have a huge staff for that. So someone would call in, we would go out and perform our soil erosion control inspections. We would try to utilize follow-up inspections as part of that. So let's say it's a foundation or whatever it might be, there's another opportunity to check in and make sure those are functioning. With some of these changes, the way that we read it was it looked like potentially we would want to move closer to what Lake County has in terms of a designated erosion control inspector, the DECI program, which I think most of you are familiar with. So with the idea that we probably want to mimic them fairly close so that we eliminate any discrepancies to make it difficult for folks that are working in both Lake County and McHenry County. We don't want there to be too many differences to make it hard and now they're, oh, what was Lake County, what was McHenry County? So that was the idea, is trying to come up with our own DECI program for McHenry County. And that's really what this discussion would be based on, is to come up with potentially some ideas or some items that we would want to put in place into the DECI program. Now, Scott and myself aren't the most familiar with it. I know we've got a lot of former Lake County members and things like that that have more involvement, that probably have a better handle on it than we do. So that's where we'd like to move towards. And obviously doing something like that, we'd have to get some amendments into the SMO with it. So I think this would kind of be the first step to discuss, figure out maybe a list of criteria or items that would feel appropriate. And from there, you know, develop that into more detail. But just for those that aren't familiar, the DECI program essentially is it's a program through Lake County where you have to pass an exam to become certified. You also have to have continuing education credits, and you have to, I think, at least show that you have somehow been involved with, you know, development. You know, you're not coming from some kind of architectural side trying to be a developer, let's say. Maybe that's a bad example, but that's the idea. And then there are certain requirements where the DECI has to be keeping logs, inspections of that particular site. And so what we would hope that would do for us is alleviate some of that pressure on staff to keep up with all of these sites. There is a federal requirement for when there's a half inch of rain, that you would have to go out and inspect all your different sites for soil erosion control. We don't have that capabilities. So this would also help fill that need. And I don't know if, like how Lake County does it, they have more staff, so potentially they have designated folks that will be reviewing these reports. So for us, if we're getting a ton of reports in, you know, that's something that we would want to consider to potentially do a little bit differently. Maybe it's they have them handy, and if somebody calls, we ask for that, or if we are curious about a certain site, we can ask for that. So that's kind of the idea behind it, and then that would help meet this criteria for the MS4.
Can I elaborate on one point?
Yeah, go ahead, Scott, please.
Sorry to interrupt. Another reason for this, so with the MS4 program, the stormwater management ordinance serves as a qualifying program for all of our municipalities to meet two of the minimum control measures that they have to meet. So for construction monitoring, which is, I think is minimum control measure 4, and then minimum control measure 5 is post-construction. So our stormwater management ordinance is what municipalities use to meet two major criteria in the MS4 permit. And our DECI program would be also serving as a qualifying program that would provide additional benefits for municipalities to meet that, that criteria. So this would provide benefit to the county, but it's also providing benefit to municipalities in meeting their MS4 permit and also protecting water quality in the county. So it really has a whole multiple tiers of benefits that the DECI program would be providing a multitude of benefits as a program for the county.
Go ahead, Ernest, please, jump in.
I have a little bit of knowledge of it, but in a backwards way. Most people know I was on private side before on county side. And while on private side, I picked up what is known as the wetland specialist on the Lake County side. And in addition to everything you said, the DECIs also have to do PDHs and CEUs. And they, because of the fact there needs to be this, and they also have to do it for wetland specialists, you're allowed to kind of grab some from each. So DECIs can take wetlands, wetlands can take DECI. I just sat through 4 hours on the DECI training 2 weeks ago.
Right.
And they are requiring the PDHs or CEUs, whatever you call it. And in listening to it and knowing the Lake County side, I guess I'd like to almost make a little bit of a suggestion. Not to slight your department, but they have a huge staff assigned only to stormwater. As a matter of fact, they just brought back in one of their guys who had retired on a part-time basis because they needed more staff. And I don't know if there shouldn't be a lesson taken from our county's health department. Again, way too much, but septic designs in McHenry County, you have to be certified by the state. And there was a movement afoot at one time saying, or Lake County, because Lake County does their own certification, state of Illinois does their own. So I hold both of those on the anticipation that county was going to go to that level. They didn't. So they don't do any training, they don't do any certifying, but they have a qualifier. I don't know if it would not be possible to piggyback Lake County. So say, okay, you need to be DECI certified by Lake County. Because I watched one of those seminars, that 4-hour seminar that I just attended, and you can see the volume of effort that went into it. And unless you've got 10 more people on staff for next year, and I haven't seen that in the budget, maybe it is.
It's not.
I'd hate to see you two, you can't. I mean, I can't physically envision it possible. I think the DECI's a great thing. And as I sat through those 4 hours, I was like, yeah, I'm glad they're doing that. You know, it's important. But for you guys to develop a training program like that and administer it, wow. The other thing, I think they do, if I'm not mistaken, they do it's random but not random audit. Right. Similar, when I was in the Navy, you had to have your analysis. And they'd randomly pull a number, and if that was your number at the end of your Social Security number, you went for your analysis unless it had happened within the last couple of months. So similarly, okay, someone's DECI certified, they're working in McHenry County. Okay, you're going to have to present your logs once every 2 years, let's just say. But if you've presented it within the last, if your number got pulled last year, you won't be pulled for another 3 or 4. Because again, the volumes of paperwork are gonna go nuts. I also, to have the certified communities in McHenry County try to do it. I know Lake County also, the DECIs are all trained by the county. And the certified communities can pull from this pool of DECIs. Again, I don't know, okay, maybe McHenry or Algonquin would have the money as far as municipalities. Any other, forget it. I mean, the resources and monies aren't there. So I guess I would move for, yes, DECI, great idea, good program. I would move for, let's piggyback and say they have to be Lake County certified. And I would, as far as the logs, audit on not an annual basis, somehow stretch it out. Because, I mean, unless they get clocked. I mean, if all of a sudden one of their sites comes up and it's halfway down the Fox, okay, pull that one in right away. And now I'm gonna shut up.
So what you're saying, Ernest, is that more or less it'd be self-reporting unless you got audited, right? You pass the certification,
Yes.
you send in the paperwork, it's assumed good that you followed the ethical minimum standards to complete that
Yes.
effort. I like that because that takes a ton of the weightlifting off of you guys.
And you have to maintain, because
Sure.
you have to do your PE, and once in a while, Lake County will so much change their ordinance that you have to go in and take a retest, because they did that for the wetland specialists. Although I was certified, my number is like I'm not one, but I'm way back there. About 5 years ago, they did such a revamp, they said, well, you're gonna have to take the test again. So we all had to recertify with the test again. So I would, for lack of a better word, use Lake County. I'm sorry, that'd be just my way.
Assuming they're good with it.
Well, anyone can go and become a
Right,
deputy in Lake
right.
County, so it's not good with it, it's if you pay
I'm
the
sure
fees and the
they
certification
inherit
every
some
year.
responsibility in the fact that you're using their program to administer it in a joint account.
Okay, I can't.
I'm
can't
not
deny
suggesting
what you're
it's a big
saying.
thing, I'm just saying they probably have to have
Well-
some sort of closure on that.
But the wetland specialists on this side are the ones that are certified for Lake County.
Sure, I'm
So
not
it's the same,
arguing
to me, it's same thing. So.
I was gonna say, I think there's a precedent set for that, because I think our wetland specialist program does, you can be, if you're certified in Lake County, then that is your qualifier, otherwise you have to demonstrate a certain number of delineations, but if you have that certification in Lake County, I think that stands. Am I correct on that, or?
Yes, that is one of the, you either prove that you're certified through school and whatever and work, or you can show that you're approved by Lake County, yeah.
So I think there's a precedent set for what you're talking about.
The NPDES permit, I think it calls for a qualified professional doing the soil erosion and sediment control inspections, right?
Right.
So I think, they could be a DECI. There's also like CPESC certifications. And so if you didn't want to totally piggyback on Lake counties and, maybe somebody who's from maybe the Rockford area and is not, doesn't visit Lake County much, you could have somebody who's CPESC certified also be qualified to do those inspections.
Yeah, I think there's a call, Wisconsin's got a specific one too, right? SESWI or whatever that is.
Yeah. And as long as you're keeping up with your certification, no matter if it's the Wisconsin one, the DECI, the CPESC, you become a qualified professional to do that, and then I would think then you could inspect a site and meet those requirements.
There's a SISAC too, or something like that. There's another
There's a bunch of them.
potential, yeah.
So I do nothing but soil erosion and sediment control inspections, so perhaps I should have spoken up sooner. A couple of things with the Lake County DECI program, in addition to the PDHs and some of your other background stuff, you have to take that or watch that yearly 4-hour seminar video that Ernest was a part of. So in order to maintain it. And yeah, piggybacking off of Lake County or mimicking what they do and or straight up using what they do, that could be a very easy way to do it. I'm with the Illinois Soil and Water Conservation Districts, and some of the counties have an agreement with Illinois EPA to do NPDES inspection work. And part of that is we are supposed to put on a yearly seminar for soil erosion and sediment control stuff. IEPA hasn't really held us to that, so we haven't been doing it. Other SWCDs do. So we could, the soil and water conservation districts could help you guys put on soil erosion sediment control seminar like what DECI does, like what Lake County does with DECIs. But if there's already a very good structure in place with Lake County, piggybacking off of them and using, or just making them match the same Lake County DECI requirements, that's also a good idea. But the soil and water conservation districts are here to help if you guys do want to put on your own training program. There was something else somebody said, I'm trying to remember who said it. I had an important note for that too. Shoot, I'm sorry.
The auditing?
Not with the auditing, it was with the auditing. Sorry, I should have been taking notes. Yeah, we're here to help if you guys want to put on your own training. We are supposed to put on a yearly training for contractors in the area, so we could help with that. Yeah, there was other stuff. Maybe somebody else will bring something up and it'll remind me.
Well, I mean,
In regard to
that would be a soft cost. So as it is now, every year the county has our annual water forum. We have our sensible salting workshops. And so what we were talking about is having a similar one for soil erosion sediment control.
Yep.
And then that training is also then municipalities would participate, and then they would be able to use that training to meet their MS4 requirements as well. So closing the loop on that. I'm sorry, you were getting ready to
No,
talk
it's
to.
okay. Yeah, and I mean, I think to piggyback on what Brian said a little bit, I mean, my assumption is the folks at Lake County Stormwater would be more than interested in a conversation, and I know there's other people even more directly connected there, to close the gap instead of just throw it in the ordinance. And the other piece of this is, I mean, I think part of the requirement for the certified professionals doing this is in some respects to eliminate the responsibility of the community, or the county in this case, of having to do those inspections. And so I can't speak for the folks running around Lake County doing this, but part of the DECI thing is that it's your responsibility as the defined DECI, which gets outlined during their pre-construction meetings, who's the DECI, to be keeping those reports. And I don't think the folks kind of, traveling around Lake County checking in on things are looking at every report that gets filed. It's your obligation as the DECI to be able to provide it if it's requested. So like Brian was saying, if you have an incidence of noncompliance, it's the DECI's responsibility then. So I mean, I think creating some way, like Darren mentioned, to have within the ordinance, here are ways in which you could get certified, but then open the conversation to potentially work with Lake County Stormwater and maybe co-host a training session might, you guys can be involved too, and everybody, it saves time and money for everybody at that point, so.
And I want to thank you, you reminded me, for the certified inspector person or the knowledgeable person under the NPDES permits, those fall under the responsibility of the contractor, and they often don't really have a certified person or a knowledgeable person to do that. I have run into that almost every time I go out. The other one that reminded me, you brought up CPESC, and that's run through EnviroCert, I believe, or maybe a few other places. They're actually coming out with a inspector-specific certification. CPESC has a lot to do with planning, erosion and sediment control, and other hydrologic features on construction sites. So if we wanted to require a certification for, whoever at municipality level or our level, EnviroCert is coming out with something more appropriate for inspections only than CPESC.
And the CPESC is probably even more onerous than the DECI,
It
as far
is.
as PDHs.
I'm in the middle of getting it, and
Yeah.
it is
I mean,
quite a bit
honestly,
of work.
more often, when I used to have it, I think it was harder to fill out your CPESC stuff than your PE stuff usually.
Yeah, the CPESC is overkill for inspection-only related work, so
And the
those
other
are just my points.
The other one I mentioned was CISEC, it's CISEC. And that's done through International Erosion Control Association.
So to kind of go off of what Dave said, rather than using the word piggyback, maybe we could approach Lake County for a partnership. And just because I don't, while they have, more staff and more dedicated staff, they don't have unlimited staff. So if they suddenly get an influx of people coming in for DECI tests and, just so they're prepared and ready to partner.
And I think we make the DECI one of a couple different menu options for people to have in order to qualify. So they don't have to be a DECI. They could be CPESC, they could be this new certification, the international, whatever that diplomat of engineering or erosion control engine.
And I'm excited to hear you talk about the qualified personnel because Cook County Soil and Water Conservation District is not interpreting it the same. I had a secretary going out and inspecting sites for NOI, and they said they really had no way to monitor it or enforce it.
Right, yeah, so because we have an agreement with IEPA, and IEPA doesn't care what certifications the Conservation District employees have to go inspect it.
No, I mean, it was on behalf of the contractor.
Yeah, but on behalf of the contractor, in their permit, they have to have a qualified person, and oftentimes they just are not.
Yeah, like I said, it was literally a secretary that didn't know what silt fence was.
Yeah. So yeah, partnering with DECI would be great.
I have a question.
Sure.
How is this implemented and funded? Is it a budgeted item or is it a permit fee?
Well, it would solely be the responsibility of the permit applicant. So, all of the points brought together, we were, everything you guys said, we were kind of thinking along those lines is we don't necessarily want to run our own program. We just kind of want to help supplement what's out there and incorporate more. So if, for example, if we come up with a program that says, if you have certification in one of 4 things, 5 things, whatever the list is that everybody seems to agree on, then that person would be qualified to carry out erosion control inspections for a development. And the applicant would then have to make sure that whoever they designate meets those certifications and is keeping up with those inspections, which would help alleviate staff's time to have to visit all of these sites constantly. Because currently what we deal with is, or I'll just go through the process essentially, we have one soil erosion control inspection. And the training that I've put on with my staff is, okay, we go through that one, and then we basically go out, silt fence is good. And this might be a 3-month project. So silt fence is good, check it off. We don't go back and do another erosion control inspection, but the guys might be back out there for potential inspections for the building. And maybe when they start excavating footings, they've stockpiled material and now the silt fence is damaged and we're getting phone calls from neighbors saying, hey, this is a potential issue. And we have no way of staying ahead of it. We're constantly being reactive to these type of situations. The only time we get ahead of it is if they go out there for any type of other inspection that then I've asked them, hey, when you're out there, go ahead and take pictures of the soil erosion control again. Or it might be a situation where they get their soil erosion control up right before it snows and the winter hits in, right? So they get approved, but they don't actually start doing anything until like February of next year. And we get a call for a foundation inspection. We go out there and their silt fence has been torn down because of the winter and whatever. And we're always kind of reacting to it as opposed to having something in place that would help keep the site monitored. And so it would go back on the applicant to have someone available. And that's why I think, to Darren's point, being more inclusive to all of these different other organizations, not just DECI, would be a benefit, because then maybe that person is coming out of another neighboring county that doesn't have a DECI certification, but they are certified in this, or whatever other credentials we want to put in place for that person to be certified to help keep track of that log, to keep the site clean. That's the basic idea, and as Scott mentioned, it does tie into our MS4 permit for things like making sure that we don't have sediments and other type of pollutants, if you will, that occur throughout the construction process. I mean, I've gone out to sites and people are digging holes and burying trash on top of that. So, you know, we can't catch those. And the only way that we do catch those is we rely on people calling in. And sometimes people like that, sometimes people don't like that. And then it can turn into, oh, I know who called on me. It's my neighbor, isn't it? And if we can avoid those situations, we would. And if it can help reduce some of staff's time to constantly be going out for things you normally would have to take care of as part of a construction site. So that's maybe a rough perspective potentially on, you know, the cost wouldn't be coming from us. It would be just the applicant needs to find a person that would meet the criteria, the requirements of being designated as certified in the county for carrying out those type of inspections.
Although the lingo cost of doing business is out there, realize that you will get guff. And the only reason I say it, last year Lake County hosted a outdoor in the field DECI thing, and they took one area and they had, I think there were 8 contractors, and they were showing all sorts of new types of technology and correct way to install silt fences, and it was an interesting field thing. But, and there were, you know, as you would move as a group, there were breaks and you're talking, and I'm listening to them, and they were, at one point, there were 2 different groups, they were comparing their costs that they put onto a project, into a development project. And it was not low numbers. I was a little surprised, actually. I mean, I don't know why, but I was. And so as you impose this, and you're meeting, I understand, you're trying to meet an NPDES requirement, don't get me wrong. Just realize, as an example, you take somebody who wants to do a very simple project in their mind, and it crosses into getting a stormwater permit, now they gotta get a decky on board. They will come back to you and say, you know what that guy's cost, or that gal's costing me, it's ridiculous, and so just, it's cost of doing business, I understand, but you're going to get that go, just forewarning.
I was actually just thinking about that, because sometimes the people that have to get the stormwater permits are just like a landowner who's doing some adjustments to their land. Perhaps for something like that, when you're not hiring a contractor, when you're just doing the work yourself, that 4-hour decky video is available online, and anybody can watch it throughout the year. That perhaps, this is too ahead of ourselves, but if it's just a landowner who needs to get a stormwater permit and, isn't going to be going out of his way to become a certified decky, perhaps just proof that they have watched this 4-hour video so that they at least have some idea of what they're doing out there for soil erosion sediment control if they're not going to use a certified contractor.
That's a great idea on Ryan's. I mean, how many of the farmers go out and build an over 5,000 square foot structure? Pole barn, or they impervious an area of gravel, and now if you tell them, well, go get a decky, you're gonna hear screams.
You have to pay to become a decky, I'm pretty sure too.
You do, you pay annually, and they're.
The decky is free.
Decky's free?
There's a fee to list yourself.
Yeah, I think
you get hosed to the list.
I think
If there is, it's pretty low.
Well, either way,
It's a low fee,
if it's a landowner doing something small, maybe, just watch this video.
Is there a minimum threshold that you would require the decky here in McHenry County? I don't think you've required for a $5,000.
That's something that I was
Or
gonna
5,000
bring up.
square foot project.
This doesn't need to be for every single site. If there's small sites like this, maybe it's not required.
Does the acre threshold apply through the MS4
I
on
think
it?
that's what you probably want to.
Yeah.
The acre threshold applies with the IEPA permit, anything over an acre, and you're supposed to have a certified professional to do once-a-week inspections, which is what we could
And I
justify.
guess what I'm asking is, does the new MS4 obligate you to go sub-acre for the certified person, or is this just codifying in the SMO the need for the certified professional?
Well, we're still waiting for the final printout, but the way that I understand the MS4 to work is it would be up to us to define our program and our goals and our criteria. So I don't think this says that every single project has to have a decky. It's just saying that you have to have something in place. So if we have those defined, when it's required, when it's not, or maybe it's a partnership, there's already an inspection fee roped into these permit fees. So does that more so maybe become a partnership with SWCD to carry out, or just throwing out, not trying to put more on your plate or something, but is there an opportunity for a partnership? Is there, can we look at it and say, yeah, this is a pole barn in the middle of an ag field, we're really concerned about, erosion from that perspective. I mean, there is items within the SMO and the erosion control already that if you've got enough of a buffer, you don't have to really worry about erosion control because you have that buffer. So some of that can already be built in and taken care of within the SMO. But then there are certain circumstances where we can look at defining it a little bit more to either put certain thresholds or have certain partnerships or give the applicant an and/or type process that might work. We come to you with this with discussion based. We don't have anything written down, and this is why we want to have it to see what the feedback is. We can collect all of that, and then maybe at the next meeting, we can come back with kind of some bullet points, some ideas to have it summarized for you guys to take a look, or we can investigate some of these other organizations and we can throw on there here some of their requirements and whatnot and kind of come back and visit this. So we're not looking to get all of this squared away, and keep in mind, we don't actually have the new MS4 permit out yet either. So even if we do come up with some good guidelines and some potential language, until that comes out, I don't think it would be a good idea for us to actually implement anything because it's not finalized.
The new MS4 is supposed to start rolling out in March. So we expect to see the actual permit here shortly. And I think most of you probably have gotten this from us, but what the EPA has provided us is basically a bullet point list of major changes that are coming with the new permit. It's just a list that they provided for us. But it does spell out some, substantial changes that are going to be coming around, and so helping us get prepared for it.
And I'm in agreement that it's not apples to apples to ask someone that's potentially, doing it, some kind of improvement that triggers a stormwater permit, if it's small compared to a commercial project where you have a large building, parking area, not the same project. And so having the same requirements for those doesn't make too much sense. So, the question you're asking, Mike, I think is very applicable. And that's kind of the point of this committee, is to figure out what that balance looks like.
So the thresholds, doesn't sound like the thresholds are changing for the acre threshold. It's so, kind of piggyback on what Dave said, was that, I guess you can set your mechanism in the ordinance to trip when you need a decky to be at that threshold. So it's 1 acre construction site. And I guess a question for Ryan is, so farming, it's disturbance of 1 acre or more. And so how does farming set aside from, a 1 acre construction site?
Yeah, they operate under their totally own set of rules. They don't fall under the NPDES permits at all.
Okay.
That's where I have the familiarity with is NPDES permits, and agriculture is exempt from that. So,
okay.
Yeah, they can do whatever they want. Well, to some degree, but it's not worried about under the NPDES program. I could talk about soil erosion and sediment control for hours. I find it very interesting. But just to come away with something, I would be happy to reach out to Lake County and see if, partnering with them for their DECI program so that we could get involved in it, just so that we came away with something from this, some sort of actionable item. I would be happy to reach out to my contacts over there to see about potentially getting a partnership started for the DECI program here. I'd be happy to do that.
Okay. Is there any other points that anyone wants to bring up? Otherwise, I'll kind of summarize some of the discussion and we can figure out what you want staff to potentially look into. So it seems like everyone is on board that this is a good idea, with really having certifications being allowed from these different organizations is an opportunity for neighboring counties or whoever that maybe isn't a DECI but is certified in one of these other organizations to be able to do the work. So I think what we'll do on our end is come up with those different organizations and what their requirements are, just with a brief overview. And maybe there's some room there for, I don't know, in doing some kind of incorporation or other qualifications that might work if someone can't get to one of those thresholds. It sounds like Brian will reach out to Lake County for partnership, but it sounds like then maybe what staff needs to do is provide some criteria for the different permit triggers and the sizes of the development, what they mean, so that we can potentially dive into and figure out when it would be applicable and when potentially it won't be. And I'll give you guys the fees associated with that. And I don't know, again, maybe it's a potential partnership or something like that on our end that we can do, I'm not sure. To bring this back around, anybody wants anything else looked at as part of that, or?
I could also ask Lake County if they have any parameters for when DECIs are actually required or when something else comparable, for smaller projects and stormwater permits are required for like landowners instead too.
Well,
maybe they already have something like that.
Yeah, and it's definitely I mean, it's pretty clear in the ordinance for what the decky, like, it's less than 1 acre if it's like, you know, it has all the issues with downstream adjoining property, isolated waters of Lake County. It seems like it's really, when I issue permits at least, it's really at our discretion if we require a decky or not, so.
Yeah, I'll ask them if they have criteria.
Because I think that's probably the big thing, right, is figuring out the criteria for the different permit types and getting that criteria list together. Okay. We'll go ahead and do that on our end as staff, and the next meeting we'll give you guys something maybe a little bit more substantive or.
I mean, to Jody's point, the watershed development ordinance in Lake County will probably be a very easy guide to just, you know, read through their language, and a lot of it may be almost direct pulled.
It is very similar to Lake County's SMO.
Yeah, well, we're gonna plan on scouring through all of it and putting together a list of different criteria. And maybe if there's criteria that's on there, we'll include it for you guys to take a look at it, and then maybe we can take a look at that list and, you know, whittle it down or keep it as is and move forward from that perspective. And, you know, once we have that, we'll probably need to dive into potentially like some of the auditing and whatnot and tracking and things like that, for staff at least to be able to monitor these things. So we'll try to encompass a lot of that for what you guys have basically been discussing. Okay, all right. We all good? Move on? All right. So, moving on, so still under the MS4 changes, the water quality section of the SMO. Here is some of the components in the MS4 changes that I briefly highlighted. So one of the big things under item 2 is it talks about BMPs, implementing BMPs and the estimated percent reduction that we're gonna get in pollutants. So I included the language from the SMO. I'll just go to that really quickly. There is also a discussion in here about being aware of so the state, do they do it twice a year or?
For
The
which,
TMDL list?
I'm not sure.
So we don't know how often they do this, but the state goes out and does testing of waterways in Illinois. And they come out with a list that basically says you have an impairment in these waters. That impairment can vary from a specific pollutant has entered that water body and it's a high concentration, so it's a danger to fish, wildlife, humans. Or it could be a degradation through erosion for habitat, you know, whatever the case might be. So they have indicated that essentially if you have a water body on that list that's within your area of control, you have to be aware of it, and then you have to provide some kind of plan of action of how you're going to be addressing those impairments, essentially. So I highlighted that piece because obviously it's tied into that. That's not something that we have a lot of experience on staff. It's the IEPA, they call it their 303D list for anyone that has heard that before. But when you go to that list, it doesn't give you kind of the specific information that you would be looking for. Oh, I have an impairment. Let me go check out what they're saying that impairment is. So through Scott's effort, he's basically found on their website kind of an online GIS tool that does a great job mapping some of that to where you can see, I think they use a color coding. If it's red, there's an impairment. If it's yellow, it's potentially, hey, you gotta keep an eye on this. If it's green, you're looking good. And you can click on different segments. And even when they say something like Kishwaukee River, it might be a portion of the Kishwaukee River. They're not saying the whole thing is. And so you can click in there and then it gives you a little bit of a better breakdown of what that impairment is. But clearly, it's something that they're looking at incorporating into these MS4 changes that we would have to be aware of. So going back to that BMP's estimated reduction levels and percentages, that's something that I personally haven't seen too much in a lot of other ordinances. Scott, if you want to elaborate on that a little bit more.
Our stormwater management ordinances really only have a few paragraphs addressing water quality in the county. When we talk about stormwater, it is important to understand stormwater is our drinking water. So our stormwater is the source of our drinking water. So the stormwater infiltrates down, recharges our aquifers. So the water quality of our stormwater has a direct impact both on surface water quality and groundwater quality. And so when we're talking about stormwater, we have to keep in mind that it's not completely separate. But we only have a very small discussion on water quality in the SMO, and most counties have much more. So Kane County, which I think is a little bit more similar to us from a land use perspective than Lake County, they will require BMPs depending on the size of the project. So right off the bat, you have to implement BMPs to address water quality. Lake County has other ways that they're addressing water quality, but we really have barely touched the surface. I know in the past, I think the TAC has talked about water quality, incorporating water quality into the SMO. But I think with the changes coming with the MS4, that is kind of a driver for us now to take it a little bit more seriously than we have in the past. And like I said, it is not just surface water that we're concerned with when we're talking about water quality, it is also our groundwater. And so I think we need to keep that in perspective as we move forward. But using the tools available to address water quality within the SMO will make it much easier for municipalities and other MS4 communities to actually address water quality within their systems. So I think we can once again kind of close the loop by addressing water quality within our stormwater management ordinance updates.
We got two hands. Who wants to go first?
Go ahead.
No, go ahead, because my topic's going to be a little off, but on. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, and so I think, if I'm understanding correctly, and I apologize, I'm not super up to speed on the MS4 updates here, but really what's driving this is the updated MS4 permit is pushing in the is pushing the state in the direction of quantified water quality, water quality treatment. Which, I mean, if anyone else does any work in Wisconsin, I mean, that's sort of the framework a lot of their stormwater ordinances up there is. I mean, you're actually doing modeling in many cases for water quality treatment as opposed to just rate and volume control. And so I don't know if anyone's got any framework of how everyone else is looking at this. I mean, even in the context of Lake County, Kane County, some of these other counties, DuPage with more developed water quality BMP sections of their ordinance. Is the impression that IEPA is pushing in the direction of having this be quantified as part of development, similar to what Wisconsin and some of the other surrounding states may do?
I can't speak to emulating Wisconsin, but a big focus of the new permit is increased metrics.
Yeah.
So I don't, who read the proposed changes 2 years ago when the IEPA was changing it? I mean, if they had implemented that, we would have had to hire 5 people just to address MS4. They received a lot of pushback on that. So it's not going to be as rigorous as that version, but they are clearly moving towards improved metrics, monitoring, and reporting. And and it's not just the MS4 that is why we would want to address water quality. but I think that's kind of a driver.
Yeah.
And, but all other counties around us have addressed water quality much more rigorously.
And it'll be interesting to see if even some of those other counties are pushing the direction of having it have to be more quantified. Because I mean, I think for the most part, it's been quantified from a volume perspective, not necessarily a treatment percentage or even, you know, percentage removal as it relates to stormwater management permitting. And if that's where this is headed, I think some of this is probably more of a regional thing to see how everyone's gonna react to it. You know, whether it's something that can be quantified in the ordinances as these types, or a technical reference manual of some kind, whether these types of treatments are, you know, we've done our research as a TAC or the county, for instance, and this treatment method provides X% removal if you use it. Or if, again, in Wisconsin for development, just as an example, I mean, you're oftentimes doing site-specific modeling and calculations for a development to quantify the requirement and whether that gets pushed to the applicants.
And I guess to follow up on that, as the MS4, would you then go to all your permit applications that you've done in the past year and have to go through all of those and say, you know, all these reductions are in developments that I've approved, so I'm packaging those up and putting those into my MS4 permit to the state?
Well, and I mean, that begs the question, is this more of a TMDL focus, that it's bigger picture, you know, MS4 community-based, or is it development by development? And I mean, it sounds like, you know, it's just, we're kind of in need of more information from IEPA on how they're interpreting their language, I guess, is the way to.
The only quantifying we've done in the previous MS4s is for the green infrastructure that the DOT has been putting in.
Yeah.
So we base that on the calculation of the square footage, the type of PMP, and then use some simple algorithm for calculating what the water quality benefits would be for suspended solids, and I don't know if we got into hydrocarbons, but those are things that can be plugged into an algorithm fairly easily. I do get the sense that they are looking more towards what are from our permitting standpoint, what are we doing, as opposed to just what are we doing in-house. But that we will need to see the final permit to
I mean, there's a
understand
lot of options. I mean, everything from empirical data just based on studies and information, to spreadsheet models that federal EPA has. There's PLET, for some of this stuff. And then again, there's fairly sophisticated modeling software for water quality too. So, I mean, some of it's just understanding.
We're getting a little off track, but we are talking like with the Fox River study group and others. It'd be ideal if all the collar counties around Chicago were using the same models, and that way we could really compare apples to apples. And so ideally we would come up with some model that we're all using so that there is continuity from place to place. Otherwise, your numbers for one project would be completely different from another community looking at the exact same thing. But I think that's beyond what we would be addressing within our SMO, but ideally that's what we'd be working towards.
And I mean, the secret to water quality modeling is it's all only as good as the data that's going into the model or spreadsheet too. So.
Well, and then also tracking is the other element of that. So when you have a BMP, having it recorded in GIS so that you can refer back to it over time. And that also will get into the ability to provide flexibility on permitting, which is something else we'll be talking about. If you have that in GIS, you're able to track that and verify that you're providing those benefits over time.
If you can scroll back up to the page 6 of the document.
Which one? Oh,
this one, you're on 13 right now. So
okay, gotcha.
6, yeah. Scott was kind enough to provide a copy of this to me, I think it was back in December or early January.
You want part E?
Yeah, that's the part absolutely. Logistically, I read through the document, I read that and eyes bugged out on myself. And I brought it forth to my supervisor. We took it all the way up to Joe Kropolsky in our department. There's an issue, and just real blanket numbers. We have about 105 structures that we analyze. Of those 105, 15 have to be looked at every year now in this world. And then of the remaining 90, you have to look at least 20%. We always aim to try to go for about 40, 50, somewhere in there. So you've got the 18, you require the minimum of, I mean, you've got the 15, you require a minimum of the 18 more. 33 annual inspections have to happen under the current rules. We do a few more, as I said, to get past there. So we may go approach about 50 sites. You're looking at the one person that does it. And that was a duty that developed and other duties as assigned after I'd come on board. So we do it, I work with Scott, we try to upgrade, we try to keep on board as far as our maintenance. When it goes to quarterly, we're talking about what would approach 420 inspections a year. And our group is saying, whoa, we can do what we've been doing, because the inspection isn't just go out and inspect. You have to have 2 hours preceding not rain. You can't go in a highly rainy season. You have to get it when it's the right time. You can't go in a drought. It's a whole series. And I usually commence in fall, and I go in till we get the heavy snows of December, which this year I was able to go all the way into January because we didn't get the heavy snows. But to try to increase it by that number, to go from what would be a minimum required 33 to 420, MCDOT does not have the staff capability. And so management is saying, whoa, we can keep doing what we were doing. They looked at me and said, are these cast in stone? And I said, well, this is kind of like a preview of what's supposed to be coming. And they said, well, how many of these are stormwater going to do? And I said, I do not know how many stormwater will do. I said, right now, we do them because we can meet the requirement. So a heads up, that's a nice statement to say go quarterly, and they do have the one caveat, oh, by the way, if it isn't, if you didn't have anything in the last 12 months, which knock on wood, I've never witnessed any kind of contamination on any of ours, I'm very happy, but, and of course there was the joke and said, well, should we consider the word semi-annual to mean every 2 years? And I said, I don't think you can get away with that. I think they mean every 6 months, but that's my own opinion, I don't know. So I just want that heads up that it's an issue, and I just wanted that to be known.
Well, it goes even further than that, because they're also talking about inventorying your facilities. So right now, DOT has been looking at outfalls, so actual structures, but they're actually talking about tracking facilities as well. That may be a little bit easier from a municipal standpoint, but from a county where you've got things spread out, so, there are some serious, to Ernest's point, and part of why we're bringing this up, there are substantial changes that are coming down the pike that can affect staffing and funding. But this is a requirement, and so we are going to have to figure out how to adapt and integrate these things into our operations. Now, part of, to alleviate it, in all honesty, this is supposed to be done by a much larger staff, and staff are supposed to be trained to identify these things. So when your staff are out in the field doing work on sewer or right of way, they're supposed to be keeping an eye out for these things, and that would alleviate some pressure on the individual. But we're going to have to figure this stuff out, and that's not all tied to the SMO. But the fact that we have serious issues coming, I think are, like I said, a driver for us to address water quality into the SMO and make it easier for everybody to meet these requirements. And our training and everything that would be provided as part of a DECI or other programs would tie into our compliance with the new regs.
So just to go back to Dave's point, I think we are looking at potentially saying, an 80% total suspended solids or sediment or something along those lines, with potentially having some criteria from documentation that you can use, this spreadsheet, that spreadsheet, this detail, whether it's from, a accredited source, Illinois Urban Manual. That's not the best example because that hasn't been maintained, but something along those lines to then say, if you meet that criteria, you're going to get that 80% credit for your site. Along with that, on what sites does it make sense to, put those thresholds? Is it all the sites? Is it, again, trying to find that happy medium between the small properties, the ag community that's got 200 acres or doing, the middle of their ag field? So these are the type of things that we would be trying to answer. I did poll, just for the sake of discussion, so I had the water quality protection information up here, so I just want to come back to it really quickly that that yes, it does talk about providing the BMP and or the green infrastructure, but it's that metric now of what do we want to put in place that is missing otherwise from a fairly short section here. And this table here is just some of the components coming out of that IEPA report of potential causes of impairment. So I'm not saying this is the list we want to follow, just throwing it up here for potential ideas of considering some of these items and trying to figure out which are the most important to some of the different community areas that we have in the county. And there isn't, and again, I'll go back to this, the requirement isn't, okay, here's the list, figure out a solution. It's up to us as, or the municipality to figure out what our targets are, what our goals are, put something in place. And as Scott mentioned, the SMO itself is a qualifying component to that. So if we're able to put in there that we can achieve for suspended solids or sedimentation, a percentage removal or whatever that criteria might be, because we're having people follow these proven designs or analyses, then it just, we can say that we would be meeting those, but then to tie back into other points that were brought up, just maintaining those, obviously, they need to be functioning in order to achieve that as well. So those are the hurdles that we would be looking at, and we don't have the final MS4 printout, so I'm not expecting us to walk away from this discussion and have a solid direction. But what I would like to figure out is where people are at, and do we want to try to figure out a rough list, and kind of what staff can do to come back during the next meeting to have more information for y'all or whatever to kind of, with both of these and the soil erosion control, I'd like to leave it at a place where we would be ready for when the MS4 changes came out to have some of that foundational work in place and then fine tune it as we need it. That's kind of the goal I think that we should have. And obviously whatever we come up with, we're gonna go back to the SMC to tell them here's what we're thinking. So there could be further changes, or if they don't like something, obviously we have to go back to the drawing board. So not really looking for full detail here, but just to, again, just like the previous session, kind of where we're at, and to develop something at least to have it so that when the actual changes come back, we can pull it up and say, okay, we're on track, we weren't on track here, or what changes do we still need to make?
So I have a question or maybe a comment. So the percent reduction, like you mentioned, there's models to figure that out. But the sites that are already needing a stormwater component, can another way to achieve that, can a volume be specified, and just say, okay, if you treat these sites that already have stormwater requirements, if you build in a section of your site to handle the first half inch of runoff, is that another way to get at that 80% reduction? And then you're not adding a whole nother layer of analysis on top of the process.
And I think to me that's sort of the crux of where this needs to head is finding out whether this really is directed at trying to have it be development specific quantification, or if like Mike's saying, that the easiest thing from a development perspective, and I think to get the most bang for the buck, is to have it defined within the ordinance, whether it's volumetrically or just these types of BMPs have been documented to provide this level of treatment. If you've done this, you've met that. Because when you look through a lot of this stuff, in most cases, if you're building a wetland detention basin, you've accomplished everything that, that is probably intended by this. So I mean, I think that's, to me, that's a little bit of what, what we need to understand is the intent of the MS4, that, this needs to be development-specific quantification, or otherwise, is there an opportunity, like I think a lot of the other ordinances in Chicagoland do, where whether it's volume-based or even, treatment-type based, is the ordinance specifies, here's what our goal treatment is for these contaminants. This type of approach meets that treatment, and you're just documenting that you've done that instead of having to do, site-specific calculations for water quality. Because it gets onerous. I mean, when you have to do that on a site-specific basis, and a lot of times you're just using empirical data sets that you don't even know where they came from, and it's sort of meaningless in some ways, honestly. So.
To kind of even simplify it a little bit beyond what you're saying is, like I think about the Walmart in Antioch years ago, right? Chloride adjacent to the lake was a big issue. So then they put together a plan where they couldn't have any sort of salt in the parking lot. It was an alternate method, or, alternate material. So just outright banning like phosphorus or, chlorides as part of a development, could that potentially meet the criteria? If it's not even there, why
Since
bother?
2008.
So I mean, like I said, we can develop our metrics and indicate that with our standards or our goals, whether it's volume-based or site-specific, and maybe it's a combination or it's an option for the applicant. We would then be able to have that in the ordinance to indicate that this is how we're dealing with a reduction in sedimentation or phosphorus or chloride potentially, or whatever it might be. And again, I'm not trying to fit everything in there. I think it's trying to fit as much as we can that makes the most sense and that doesn't become overburdensome, not only to staff, but to applicants.
Maybe it's something for staff to look at between this and the next meeting, would be looking at what other counties are doing, right? Lake County has got specific requirements, DuPage County has water quality requirements, obviously Kane, Lake. So looking at all those, and then we can pick out the best parts of them and get rid of the worst parts of them.
They're all relatively consistent too, and I mean, I think it affords the opportunity, and then the question is, do those counties believe that their in-place ordinances meet the new MS4 requirement too, I think is the other thing, or are they gonna have to make updates that say, we've had this in place, this provides X, because I think some of the technical reference manuals get there, but I don't know that the ordinances necessarily do, with respect to these treatment trains provide this level of treatment, and whether that needs to be defined based on some level of research or just available data. And I mean, as far as on that list, I mean, just to throw out there, I mean, almost invariably PSS is used as a proxy for a lot of these things. And then I know the Lake County ordinance has that hydrocarbon removal piece for new parking lots, which has become a little bit of a sticking point in the unincorporated part of the county. But I'll just leave my experiences at that. But, so I think, I don't think we need to get too in the weeds. I think if you look at kind of TSS and hydrocarbon, with chloride being its own separate entity to a degree, I mean, I think that probably gets to most of what we're looking at here. I mean, and the chloride thing is a whole just different animal, obviously.
Well, and so I've been looking at Kane County, and I work with a lot of the folks there. They have a pretty simple matrix. The project falls into a Category 1 or a Category 2. Category 1 has to provide both volume runoff reduction, runoff volume reduction, and water quality treatment. And the case in point is like a parking lot over a certain square footage needs to provide pre-treatment. So a filter strip before it goes into the system, removing hydrocarbons. And once again, that's a pretty simple calculation that can be made to determine the spacing of the filter strip So I think any system we create we'd want to be as simple as possible to implement and have applicants comply with. And by all means, look at what's being done elsewhere as opposed to reinvent the wheel. You know, any step really is going to be a step up for us. But I think there are simple models out there right in our own backyard that we can draw from that can be replicated and adapted to our needs and provide flexibility so that it's not onerous on you know, smaller projects. You know, we can have any number of categories that we would want to do, but we can create a matrix that makes that fairly simple to follow.
I think the thing for this county, looking at it through the lens of, you know, the other counties are focused on water quality and, you know, maybe streams and lakes, but you also have to think about the drinking water part of it too. So that may be another step of analysis you'd want to look at when you're looking at water quality treatment.
Part of that is, we'll get into that a little bit more as part of another topic, but we have, I can't remember if they're from Kane County or DuPage, we have someone that was looking at developing kind of an overall matrix to kind of share amongst the region so that we could have everybody kind of be on the same page in terms of permitting, and if you do this, you're gonna get this removal, whereas potentially if you do it in this county, you get this number, in that county you get that. So that is in the works, but we don't know to what level it's at yet, and we're not sure exactly how every other county or municipality as well is gonna jump on board or that.
Anything that can be done to build consistency in the regulations in the region, I'll say, as a frequent applicant would be lovely.
Right.
And we understand, and that's, you know, a lot of the changes that we do want to make with the program is trying to keep that consistency for everyone involved, so. So I guess just to summarize, we'll take a look at what other counties are doing and in the area and come up with the different criteria they're having, metrics, et cetera, to figure out what we like, what we don't like, maybe where the gaps are. And it sounds like from kind of Dave's input is to maybe take a look at TSS, hydrocarbon, and chloride as kind of the three main components, and everything outside of that really would be case by case.
Well, I think encompassed within that, and I mean, just to clarify on the chloride, I mean, the current answer is, other than climate change fixing that problem for us and using less salt, I don't know that there are great solutions for chloride.
Well, regarding chloride, so McHenry County is a leader in sensible salting, but we also work collaboratively throughout the region. And so a new program that we've developed, I don't know if you're familiar with it or not, but Salt Smart certification. So when we were looking at chloride reduction in the region, parking lots and sidewalks are completely unregulated. Most municipalities are trying to do some form of SaltWise, Salt Smart, sensible salting, but parking lots are actually incentivized to put more and more down. So the Salt Smart training and certification program is now up and running. It's targeting parking lots throughout the region. And that is something, we have basically a four-step process. First was to come up with a regional manual, so we're all working off the same page. Second was to create a training and certification program based on that manual. The third stage is then to work with municipalities, counties, and other entities to require certified contractors. And then the fourth phase is then to use that as the foundation for state legislation that provides limited liability protection for property owners that hire certified contractors that are properly implementing sensible salting or Salt Smart practices. Because then that uses market forces to drive chloride reduction. And so we're now in the third phase of that. We're ramping up the training and certification program throughout the region, and then working on developing model ordinances and working with other entities to require certified contractors. So that's certainly something we could look at as addressing the chloride element of this.
That may be worth, codifying in the ordinance for new development, especially if there's parking included, is, one of the requirements is just, some level of certification through that program as essentially one of your BMPs.
Mm-hmm. So that's certainly something we can look at, and I can, arrange to have the Conservation Foundation is the entity that ultimately put this together under a grant from the EPA. So, I mean, this really is a very solid program that's been developed.
Limited liability is key.
Yep.
Because, slips and falls, the liability with regard to that, I've heard from almost every privately held parking lot, any like mall or something like that, that a slip and fall, that expense to them
Right.
writes any salting issues at all.
100%.
So, they, like hospitals, et cetera, I mean, they basically think that, they don't want people's feet to touch the pavement. They just want, them to be walking on salt. So, I'm serious.
Yeah.
So.
About 80% of what's put down on parking lots is actually 100% useless. It provides no benefit at all. So it's the protection that they really want, and so that's where the certification comes into play. But it's all working towards state liability protection.
Great.
Okay.
I think some of this, I think Dave alluded to it earlier, that you're gonna get your,
Here's another list, sorry.
cover your water quality just with like a wetland basin. So we need to see what's in the ordinance currently that's already covering these items, and we may be covered for a lot of this that's coming down.
Yeah, it may just be as simple as quantifying what the requirements already are as it relates to water quality. I mean, if this is already a required part of your stormwater management system, and certainly there may be some additional BMPs that some of the other counties have that aren't included in the McHenry County ordinance, but it may be as simple as saying, this is the stormwater requirement, this provides that level of treatment, thus you're already there in some respects.
They have that in Texas. They kind of list out what you need to do to meet the water quality. And they have a laundry list of items. You put those into your development plan and you're good to go.
We'd certainly like to simplify it from that fashion, where if someone's doing a treatment train and they choose a wetland basin, okay, you're meeting all basic requirements. Or if you don't want to do that, maybe it's, a combination of these other items that potentially take care of that.
There's percentages assigned to each item as to, what their FSE is and how it contributes to the overall water quality.
Yeah, to piggyback on what Steve said, I think MWRD's already done this, or at least for phosphorus. So if you want to use that, that would tie into the TSS kind of component, but I think they've done this and it was volumetrically based. It's part of their park process.
Okay, well, we'll pull some of that information and literature that we can find for you guys to give you a little bit of a flavor, to kind of sift through that and see where we might land. And again, not calling it a final list or anything like that, but just having something in place so that when some of this is finalized, we can, assess if we're on the right direction or not. And we've got a good starting point, because we will have 1 year.
Yeah.
So we will have 1 year to implement this. So on the 2025 reporting cycle, we will need to be demonstrating a lot of this. And if we've got it in the ordinance, then we can, as Scott said, it's a qualifying document, so we can show that we're meeting some of those requirements through that. And even as we're waiting, if we don't get the actual MS4 permit, maybe there's a delay, it doesn't come out in March. Whatever we come up with, at least, I can still pitch back to SMC just to see if they're in agreement that, yeah, this is a good starting point, let's wait and see, or, kind of gauge their temperature on it all too. So we do have to think about, they're gonna be giving the ultimate approval, so we do have to keep them engaged as much as possible. So we'll go ahead then for the next one, we'll kind of, again, scour information, put something a little bit more detailed together, and we can pick and choose and figure out where the gaps are and come up with something that will be a starting point for us. But, you know, on the screen, this is, again, just to point out, this is the water quality section. It does discuss that, but it doesn't give some of that information where if someone wanted to do a wetland basin, since that's been brought up, that you're gonna get removal of X, Y, and Z, so.
Kind of points, and, you know, when I've done reviews for communities, I mean, you go to bullet point number 1, it's kind of a generic, you should provide water quality treatment, and then right at number 2, it's already talking about, you know, putting in the hoods on the catch basins, and so that's ultimately what people seem to default to, and you actually hold your public road developments almost to a higher standard because you're making them drain to filter strips and
Right.
and other.
There are inconsistencies, yeah, and because of that vagueness, I mean, we encounter it where we get pushback, and it's almost a battle at that point for us to get something that might seem reasonable that they don't want to do, so, yeah. All right. So moving on, I don't have this in the agenda, but basically just, I don't know how many of you are aware of this, but we do have a comprehensive, so item number 6.3, we do have a McHenry County Comprehensive Stormwater Management Plan that was written in 1996. Since it's kind of been brought to our attention through a grant process, staff has been holding meetings on it. And one of the big items that we have is we'd like to go towards a watershed-based approach. So we've already seen, or some of you are aware of some of the discussions that we've had at SMC regarding the agricultural versus the development side. Sometimes you have the subdivision right up against the agricultural side, and you can start creating some very diverse watersheds. And we want to update it, but we didn't want to update it in a way that just broadly speaks to agriculture and urbanization and those type of elements. And some of the feedback we've been getting is that people are on board with this idea. One of the, goals of this would be to see what can come out of it that can drive SMO changes. Potentially to get even more specific. And, you know, we've been talking about some of these thresholds and numbers and things like that, and how do we find a sweet spot for the agricultural side, the development side, your smaller single-family residence versus your larger commercial development. So this is going to aid in that. We've been getting really good feedback. So what I will say is I'll bring everyone up to speed and then just kind of open it up to any kind of comments or, you know, things that we want to talk about, so that as we continue to develop this, we can incorporate that. But the ultimate goal here would be to try to get grant funding to do this. And the idea would be that we would get buy-in from communities as well. So they would be our stakeholder in this. And talking with some of the folks that already have this in place, what we would be looking to do is have a document available for any of these communities to be ready to jump at any funding opportunity for potential projects within their community. So the idea would be this would be a plan that would meet IEPA 319 requirements. It would also can be used for any other kind of FEMA grant requirements. And it's a partnership to move forward with those communities and continue to develop those projects. And the idea would be that at any point they can use this document that as they see fit as well. So that's the benefit to them. It's getting specific, and they don't feel that this is driven by the larger areas, your McHenrys, your Woodstocks, your Algonquins dominating the conversation. Well, what about us over here in Harvard and Marengo? And especially since some of these areas are still rural, and we can potentially see McHenry County in the future being kind of a hotspot for development. And so these projects tie into the water quality stuff that we're talking about, and you know, protecting our aquifers as seeing as stormwater as also our drinking water. and making sure that we have recharge, because it's not only drinking water, but the farmers are using this for irrigation. So as they continue to use higher irrigation wells, maybe they're running out of water too. So it does affect everybody. But when you're looking at it, in a watershed in Algonquin is probably gonna have different needs than a rural area. That's just, the fact. Which one?
We recently added watershed boundaries, so the
Oh, yeah.
HUC 8, HUC 10, and HUC 12 boundaries to both our Athena GIS online mapping and our plan development interactive mapping. So it's going to make it a lot easier just to be talking about watersheds.
Yeah, let me pull it up. So what we're thinking is using those as the base. And so where we're at is, so these are all the different watersheds. Let me see if I can zoom in without. So these are the different watersheds, and this is kind of our starting place we were hoping to work off of. And we're hoping to kind of develop a list, and not only develop a list, but potentially group these together. As we understand, as long as the rough areas of these don't exceed about 100 square miles, the IEPA would still be looking to grant projects through the 319 program. So it would be an opportunity to try to group some of these together that might have similar characteristics.
Into a watershed plan.
Into a watershed plan. So you might have 2 or 3 of these HUC watersheds into one watershed plan that would get a designation. We're also looking to identify some of the areas, for example, in Algonquin and whatnot, and some of the work that CMAP has done. A lot of this information and work might already be done. And so what we're looking to do is, if Algonquin has a watershed or Crystal Lake, then we can just take their information and put it and input it as part of that overall kind of watershed for that community area, if you will. And some of the feedback that we've gotten from these folks is they've said, yeah, go for it. We wouldn't mind being incorporated into those areas. And they indicated that, you know, some of the numbers driving this is basically they've been putting in something like $10,000 to $15,000 from their community to help work with consultants to identify some of these different projects, and whether they call them green corridor or green infrastructure or whatever the case might be. The benefit of that is, in one example, they're getting like $1 million plus in grant funding for these projects. But the key is that they're readily available, whether it's in a spreadsheet or something, so that when the opportunity comes up, they're ready to jump on it. It's already there and it's dialed in, and there's very minimal additional work that needs to be put in place. And because we're putting these thresholds and criteria on it, we already know it's going to be at a good enough level to where they're not going to have too much difficulty in securing some of these funding. The only consideration would be potentially competition and other factors, and maybe they've already been receiving a good amount of money. But that's kind of where we're at. So we're trying to develop a list right now of kind of the total number of watersheds that we're looking at. How many of them have information, how many of them don't, how many of them potentially need to be updated to where we might as well look at it as needing new information. And so part of the hurdle to that is the cost and the time frame. So just at a preliminary basis, we're looking at potentially $100,000 to $150,000 per watershed, depending on per watershed plan, depending on the area. So do you know roughly how many HUCs we have?
I don't remember.
Okay, so looking at this, if we, guesstimate
up to 30.
However many these are, if we can group them together and maybe boil them down, then we can save on some of those costs potentially and time. So some of the estimates we're getting out of this is that it potentially takes about a year of just gathering information and working with these communities to figure out where their needs are, where the funding needs to go. And
the other thing to consider, I mean, a lot of these watersheds have plans in place.
Right.
That's what you're saying.
100%. So if we can save costs there by reusing that information, we definitely need to do that. And so that's where staff is right now, at least, in trying to comb through that data, put that data together. We haven't, we've kept this at a very preliminary stage. I didn't want to move too far forward without getting input from the group here. But that's, to your point, Dave, that's where we'd like to see what there is available to save costs on that. But, it might come down to maybe we need 8 watersheds to be studied is what that magic number is potentially. I don't know what that's going to come out to. But then there is the time-sensitive component to that. If you have 8 watersheds, if you're trying to get this thing done in 3 to 4 year grant cycle, then you're potentially looking at running them simultaneously with multiple consultants. We are continuing to kind of meet with other staff, other counties, other municipalities that have gone through this process or are looking to do this process. So we are still gathering information, but that's kind of the general idea behind this. The comp plan, again, our approach is let's go as big as possible. So outside of the watershed issue, just to give you guys an idea, we would like to develop our own rainfall gauge network, stream gauge network that would be able to take sampling and whatnot. So again, this can go back into some of those metrics of, hey, we've got these, we updated our stormwater ordinance in terms of water quality, and is this actually working or is it not for some of these potential pollutants, let's say. So having some of these other things in place can help supplement that. Obviously funding is a consideration of that, so, but that's the idea, is to kind of go big and then bring it in from there. And maybe some of these items that we identify we'd like to do, maybe that's a future goal as part of the comp plan. But we're looking at grant funding for that. We actually got to the point where we were looking at securing funding, but we pulled the brakes because the grant that was in was kind of very bare bones. And it was just kind of brought up through our EMA section, like, hey, I gave a call, they're looking to relook at this again. So we kind of scrambled to put something together. But in context with FEMA, they're basically like, well, if you get me the funding commitment letter, I'll probably get you the money. And so we just said, well, what if this isn't enough? And is this how we really want to do it? And so that's why we kind of pumped the brakes and came back to this watershed approach idea. And we've already been considering as well some of these watersheds that get cut off at the county, finding partners with, those counties and those municipalities and looking to kind of set a standard for this, develop a network for the community to be involved so that they can feel like they're getting specific ideas for their area, not just generalities. So I don't know if I missed anything. I probably did, but.
Yeah, just, with the watershed plan, a big part of that is looking at existing conditions, what are issues in that watershed. And, as Sonia was saying, with Spring Grove's issues are going to be very different than Moraine Hills. Even the topography is going to dictate different approaches. And so that's one of the reasons why we're kind of leaning towards a watershed approach, is so you really can address specific issues within different parts of the county. And this is an ambitious idea, and it only can happen if we can get big dollars. But a lot of the big dollar grants that are out there, they want big projects so they can fund a single project as opposed to 100 small ones. But a part of a watershed plan is identifying the existing conditions and then developing a list of projects within that watershed to improve things. And then by having that list, you're then eligible to then pursue 319 grant funding and funding through a variety of grant sources. And once these plans are in place, the demographic information is not going to change dramatically, and these need to be updated every 10 years. So once they're in place, if it's a good plan, then all you're really replacing every 10 years is a list of projects. But that list of projects is what enables you to hop on opportunities when they come up. The other thing is with the 319 grants and the watershed plan, you're focused on water quality, but that doesn't mean your project can't address flooding. So ideally, we would be coming up with projects that would address, I always talk about multiple benefits or stacked benefits within a project, address flooding within a region, but, you're addressing it through the water quality context. But your projects can certainly address a multitude of issues, not just water quality, but you're pursuing the grant funding specifically for water quality issues. But that's the idea behind the watershed approach, is empowering communities within the county to to compete for funding and to bring the funding into the county to actually implement these projects that address water quality and flooding and other issues.
In doing this, overall, good concept, good idea, if the monies can be attained. But you're not looking at in any way changing when a project is going through as far as the hydraulics or a hydrology study, you're not looking at changing that process specifically. I mean, we're about to do the north end of Randall Road. I mean, would this change everything? Because we're already into design, and if you change the system, I'm just like, how do we find this out, and when, and what does it change?
So what you're asking is, are the watershed-specific criteria going to be brought into the ordinance?
It's non-regulatory.
Right now,
It shouldn't be, but I'm just confirming. I want to confirm, because you get a project that has a 10-year life, and all of a sudden something changes midstream. You're like, wait a second, why did that change? And
so the ordinance does allow it, and you have it in place for Crystal Lake area, correct? And that's it so far?
Yeah, the Crystal Lake watershed is one watershed where it's developed, and Darren probably can speak more to that, but yeah, this isn't meant to, this plan itself is not meant to be regulatory, but within it, if there's certain items that are identified that, oh, these are some issues, then it can help drive SMO changes. I think one of the items that is always brought up is, how did you come up with the 20,000 square foot of new impervious threshold for detention? How did you come up with this threshold? So in understanding that in more rural areas, maybe those thresholds can change, just as an example, then maybe that's where these plans can help drive some of those SMO changes. But it's not meant to be regulatory. It's meant to kind of figure out where we're at, where we want to be. And if that means that we have to make some SMO changes, then, we'll cross that bridge at that point.
thank you.
I think one thought on this, and I mean, I know CMAP's, got a lot of regional approaches to this stuff, but I'm not aware of any other counties looking to address sort of comprehensive planning on a watershed basis necessarily, but I saw some other nodding is, the numbers you're throwing out and the timelines of the watershed-based plans in particular, to address the 9 key element stuff. I mean, they are big numbers in long time frames. And, one thing to explore just potentially is there a way to look at the missing watersheds in the county and work with IEPA or others to see if there's a streamlined approach to that? Because even as someone who's gotten paid to prepare those plans, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that goes into them that's just there because it's there and doesn't necessarily, to your point, Scott, support the development of the project. So, I mean, one thing to explore with this is working with some of the folks who would approve these to see if you approach it on a county-wide basis. And like you said, say you got 60% of the county that you're trying to backfill, you figure out how you break the watersheds down. Is there a more streamlined plan that could come out of that as opposed to just sort of the formulaic ones that are being developed now? Because a lot of the stuff in those, like you said, I mean, you even kind of hinted at it, Scott, it's a lot of demographic stuff and it's great information and it's useful, but you're sort of just making maps and writing sections just to fill a criteria in a lot of cases.
I think part of what we're talking about is trying to take this approach, and I hate the term, but cookie cutter, to standardize the approach, and then that would provide an economy of scale that would allow us to do these things a little bit more efficiently and quickly and have them somewhat uniform. And that way, like I said, over time, it'll really just be the back end that is having to be updated. Really trying to design it so that it can be done more efficiently, and then prioritizing and drainage districts that want to do certain projects, maybe they would, where you have stakeholders that are engaged, may drive where the plans are initially done. So there certainly would be an approach to prioritize certain areas. But I think these things can help provide funding for a lot of things like cover crop investment and drainage district improvements and things along those lines. Once again, it's geared towards water quality, but that doesn't mean you can't address other issues as well.
Provided you move forward and you receive the funding. As you do look at these, you said, as Groucho Marx would have said, the secret word, there are many drainage districts that cross over multiple watersheds. As you're clumping, please look into that part. I mean, I know the Hebron one, and I know Coon just went active. Coon covers, depending on how I look at your map, 3 or 4. So as you're doing your clumping, look at that as part of your criteria, not just surface water or breaks, but also because the piping that was done, and as good or as bad as it is in place, will have effects on that whole thing, so please.
Yeah, and I think even if we end up cutting through a community because of geographically or whatever the case might be, then it doesn't necessarily mean like, we might just be operating, okay, for this area, we have this watershed plan in place that lets us build these projects. So if it's like an east and west, maybe the west half is a watershed, west watershed that allows them to build those projects, and the east watershed is east watershed that allows them to build those projects. So I don't think it's the way that we understand it is that it's really within this area, here's a list of projects that anybody can go and secure the funding for. But we understand that there's those type of components that come with that.
So long as, maybe I'm beating a dead horse, just so it doesn't lose credence. As an example, when we did that funding of projects, MCCD did a great job in the fact that one project up by the Hebron district, they picked up and continued the drainage that was above and below them, even though they were going to do a pocketed event. So they kind of, but I'd have to look at the map more closely and compare it, but a lot of them are going to cross, so just please, consider it.
100%, and that's why having the county drive this is gonna be helpful, because we can make those connecting points between watersheds so they're not, so that you can't do something upstream that affects you downstream. But at some point, with like the Fox, we will have to cut that up, and
Yes.
So, but that's the, at least in my eyes, the word comprehensive is that's why we would seek to do it the way that we are, and have the communities kind of underneath as stakeholders trying to fund their little portions to help fill those lists of projects.
Well, that may be the reason for grouping several watersheds together. So, typically you're looking at, if it's a similar land use within an area, you can lump like 3 sub-watersheds together into a single plan. So, those are the kinds of criteria that would justify lumping those together possibly. So that certainly would be looked at. And a municipality or an entity can be part of multiple plans. It's by no means exclusive or restrictive. So, we'd be looking for stakeholders, to participate in developing any of these plans. So we fully expect a lot of the same stakeholders to be part of multiple plans, if that addresses your question at all.
I'm also hurting right now. We tried to, you're aware of 47, and they're putting in 6 roundabouts through IDOT. And they started work down by McConnell and 47. And as they were working on it, I saw them bring out the dozers, and they're starting to rip down Dwight, the auto body shop. And I pushed it through our group. Our group got word to IDOT saying, don't take that foundation out. There's a massive drain tile that goes under the Dwight one, under the railroad, it did not get to IDOT in time. IDOT struck it, They're running a 3-inch pump right now, trying to get a repair in place.
That's
And we
why
just got
water eroded.
and that's, it flooded 47.
Yeah.
We just got our apology letter. Gee, thanks, we wish we'd have read our emails. So I'm just like, and that picks up drainage from past the fairgrounds and takes it all the way south of the Ford dealership at 14 and 47. I'm looking even crudely as best I can see, I'm like, oh, that covers about 3 of them, and that's one municipality, and that's one of the 6 roundabouts. So we're still stinging from trying to get word that never got there. So the sky did fall, and Chicken Little was right, but they didn't pay attention. So.
And hopefully, to your point, that's what this would help to avoid, because that list of projects would be defined.
Hopefully.
So.
Yes, I understand it as merit. It's just, consider all the other parts, not just, oh, here, there's a surface.
100%.
Okay, thank you.
So just to clarify, it's almost like a watershed improvement database. You'll clump together some of these watersheds into bigger ones, and here's a list of projects that could be done that would improve the water quality in this watershed, so that when grant funding becomes available, the municipalities can quickly apply for the grant funding and say, these are the projects that this project or a couple of these projects we'd like to do. And that's just information in a database that McHenry County has put together of good projects to do in these watersheds.
Basically, yes, but we're hoping that it extends beyond that to even potentially like flooding issues. Maybe there's zone A areas that can be studied to help get better information, because we're identifying that a community is having flooding issues, and that data could be critical to understanding what type of projects are even feasible. We don't necessarily want to recommend a project that isn't gonna make an impact towards a flooding issue or water quality issue. So we're looking to go beyond just that, but that's one of the components from a funding source that would be incorporated into it, yes.
So a lot of legwork goes into identifying the projects. You come up with a budget for each of the projects. So that way, funding is coming from, any number of sources. It's not just 319 grants, but 319 grants are kind of big dollar items that you can pursue. But if you've got 3 months window where this grant's going to be available, if you have to rent a project from scratch, you're not going to be competitive.
Time.
If you've got a project figured out, you're able to get your application in, you're gonna have it all figured out. You are gonna be much more competitive pursuing that grant funding than anybody else out there. So that's one of the big benefits, and then we're bringing money into the county, and then we're addressing all these issues as a result of being proactive.
Yeah, okay.
And that's directly, Scott, that's the feedback that we've got, is a grant might come up all of a sudden out of nowhere because there's money available, and you got 3 months, 6 months, whatever it is. And the person we directly spoke to is like, I got a spreadsheet, I can go to it. I go this, and this, and I'm, and they're in the door with a very detailed, as Scott mentioned.
Doing the legwork ahead of time.
Yes. And that was their opinion of why you're gonna get pretty good feedback from communities, because they're paying in $5,000, $10,000, $15,000, but they're opening the door for 20, 30 projects worth millions.
So I just forwarded you, Stoyan, I was glad we moved the meeting date because this conflicted with the Fox River Study Group meeting.
Okay.
But the Fox Waterway Agency is having a presentation of their watershed-based plan on March 13th.
Oh, okay.
So I sent you that link for the registration for that.
They have an afternoon and an evening, so no
Yes.
excuse for not participating.
Yes. And then the IEPA also announced that they're gonna have a training session for their new permit. I don't know if they didn't give any indication on what date that is, but it sounds like they are ramping that up and they're gonna.
I hadn't heard that.
Yeah, so if I get it, I'll send it to you for.
That'd be great.
Okay.
Yeah, and
That's to
anyone that
address
wants
that,
to send me information along these lines, please go ahead. I can forward it back out to the group. A lot of you are already involved in municipalities, so this extends beyond just what we do here at TAC. It could be beneficial in multiple areas, so yeah, use me as a conduit if you want. I don't mind.
That IEPA training that you brought up is to address the competent person for, or part of it is to the competent inspector. I thought, or I know they're gonna be doing that too.
It'd probably be part of it, but I think it's to go over all the changes in their new MS4 permit.
Okay, never mind.
Yeah, please forward that, because I haven't received that notification.
Well,
Is an actual date, Mike, they
no,
said?
they didn't give a date yet for that.
We did an update to this, didn't we?
I don't know, so I was just gonna say, if we're good on watersheds, it seems like the positivity and momentum's still there, we'll go ahead and move forward, and we'll, again, we'll try to come up with, our goal is to come up with a list, we'll try to figure out more communication, and see if we can streamline some of this information, and, we'll come back with another update, so. Okay, moving forward to the NIPSI chart. So this is coming out of the ordinance in Appendix 6. I myself am not too familiar with this outside of understanding what it does. But before Joanna had left, she mentioned this was going to get updated. The reason I wanted to bring it up was because I now have an outdated tool for people to use that doesn't reflect the new Bulletin 75 data. So my question to you guys, probably being more familiar with it, is there an update that we can use, or do we want to update this? That's the general question, because my fear is it's applicable, I think, to projects that are less than 20 acres. So instead of someone using Bulletin 75 data, they're using this older data that is still in the ordinance and allowed. So potentially they could be undersizing their detention that might be adjacent to a subdivision, an agricultural community, a right-of-way, that we're seeing flows that aren't reflected to what the current conditions are. So that's where I was really going with this, is there an update available or not, or?
Yeah, there is. So actually Joanna and Brian Frank were working together to get the new updated chart together,
Okay.
and Lake County did adopt theirs, so theirs is Appendix K, and
Okay.
I thought they were working in conjunction.
I think there was one that we had a draft, and maybe our TAC kind of disbanded or never voted on it, but I'll look back through the history and see what I have. But I thought we had something that we discussed at one of the meetings, and we had an update to this.
Well, maybe I need to check my records too, I guess, but the Lake County one, it's, because I thought Lake County was going to take the Bulletin 75 data and potentially even tailor it a little bit more. I could be wrong, I don't know if they necessarily did that, but I just want to, or maybe I'm crazy for making that statement.
It might be slightly different because they were using isohydro values before.
Okay.
And I think that, isn't there something where if you have a 50% of a 50-year in Lake County for detention or something?
Oh, the Bill 50.
Bill 50, yeah. So that was done to allow communities to not require the full increment of the change in the rainfall volume if the community adopted a Bill 50 program. So it was passed in conjunction with the new chart, but the new chart I don't think reflects, it's just the rainfall for Lake County. I don't know if Bulletin 75 differentiates McHenry or the full expanse of McHenry as anything different.
I think it used the sectional Bulletin 70, which would include McHenry County as well.
Yeah.
So I would think that you could, with some conversation with Brian Frank, I think you could almost take their chart, which is in their appendix, and use it.
Okay. Well, I don't want to belabor this point, so I'll go ahead and reach out, or Jody, if you have anything.
And I'll
Steve,
see
if you
what
want
I
to check.
have too.
What we'll do for next time then is I will, I'll show you guys what they have, or what we have, and we can figure out what the committee was working on before, so. All right. The next item here, integrating the sensitive aquifer recharge area into the SMO. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with this, but here's the map of our, and I'll probably hand it over to Scott to give a little bit more detail, but this map here represents what we call our sensitive aquifer recharge area. The county is kind of ahead in the game because we've had our geology mapped essentially. So a lot of this mapping came from that analysis to determine that these are areas that with high probability are recharging our aquifers. And this is not mentioned in the SMO. It's actually mentioned in our UDO, McHenry County's UDO, with the only requirement being that, hey, you can only, if you're in a SARA area, you can't develop more than 50%, you can't turn more than 50% of that SARA area into impervious. We still want to be getting that recharge. And so the reason why that's important is that if it's not in the SMO, it does not extend to your incorporated areas. I don't know how each one, if they're even aware, most of them are probably not, but Scott, tends to have a lot of conversations, so we're hoping that, there is that awareness of this. So why that 50% number was chosen, I don't know. So that would be kind of the question to you all would be, number one is we should probably incorporate it into the SMO. I don't think anyone would disagree with that, but that would be the first question. And then number two, what kind of restrictions do we want to place on this? These are identified areas important for recharge. We already discussed erosion control and water quality, so I don't want to belabor those points. But this is going to tie into that conversation. And so maybe it's just incorporating it into the SMO in terms of impervious coverage, and whatever water quality components we come up with are going to be good enough for the SARA areas, or maybe they're not, I don't know. So that's kind of the topic of discussion for this, to kind of see where the group is at and what the thoughts are, so that staff can come back and, develop some guidelines out of this.
When I give a history.
And yes, and Scott, if you can.
So once again, this is a sensitive aquifer recharge areas map, and this is the second edition of this. I see Cassandra is here, who's implemental in what?
Stephanie.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was thinking you're Cassandra. Hello. Never mind. So the original one was done, I think, in 2007. Looking at the superficial recharge areas, so areas that have high potential for infiltration. The latest version we developed, and it's almost identical, but this is based on the three-dimensional mapping that was done by the Illinois State Geological Survey for McHenry County. And so the red areas are areas identified as either high potential for infiltration or moderately high potential for infiltration. So these are the areas in the county that provide the greatest areas for recharge, for water to land on the surface and infiltrate down and recharge the aquifers that are being used in the county. The same mechanism that allows water to infiltrate down also means pollutants can infiltrate down. So this mapping provides information on both recharge to our aquifers and the potential for contamination to our aquifers. So it can be used both from a water quality and a water quality standpoint. We're demanding more and more water from our aquifers, but we're putting less and less in as we develop, or even compact the soil or install drain tiles. All of those are robbing water that would otherwise infiltrate down and recharge our aquifers. So we have a vested interest in maintaining the recharge to our groundwater aquifers and preventing pollution to our aquifers. The worst pollution we have in the county has been from stormwater. So primarily where industries dumped solvents and PCBs and other things out the back door, and then that washes out and then infiltrates down in the ground. So we've got entire areas of aquifer that are not usable anymore. Water is necessary for all life. Water is also our main economic driver. Without water, you're not going to be having people invest in homes or businesses. You can't use it for irrigation. Water is our economic driver. So this map really is very important from a regulatory perspective. And how we use it, is up to you guys.
I have a question, because this kind of sparks a memory that I had. I think in the water quality protection section of the ordinance, it does mention these areas with pre-treatment.
It does talk about pretreatment from like an infiltration perspective. Appropriate pretreatment shall be provided for stormwater runoff directed to new and existing injection wells. Appropriate pretreatment shall be provided for stormwater runoff directed to infiltration-based practices in areas designated as high or moderately high potential for aquifer recharge. So yeah, I guess you're right. It is in here, and it's just tying that. The other component that's not tied in here for pretreatment though is the coverage, that 50% number.
Yep.
It's coming only from the UDO. And so I want to try to incorporate a number into the SMO to kind of help this. And obviously as we develop the water quality section, this is kind of in there as well.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, doesn't this area also, that's maybe a UDO question, trigger conservation design in these areas?
Yeah, under the UDO right now.
So, I mean, the thought process shouldn't be too tough if you're following standard conservation design practices. But that pre-treatment only comes into play if you're doing infiltration design, which is technically not mandatory yet, right?
No. And the UDO doesn't extend to incorporated municipalities as well. So that's the other kind of, that's where I was really coming at it. Is it's great that it, you know, the UDO has some references and design implications, but the municipality doesn't necessarily have to do that. And yeah, someone could argue, well, I'm not doing infiltration, so I don't have to, you know, meet these requirements. But yeah, that's kind of the idea behind this.
There are some municipalities that take this, you know, higher level than others, like Crystal
Right.
Lake does,
Right.
right? And I see signs in Woodstock that about, you know, along the roadway, does Woodstock have an ordinance like that?
I don't know. The Crystal Lake one I'm familiar with because it is mentioned in here for infiltration practices. So, you know, that, yeah, 100%, like some areas are definitely covered. Other areas are not. And, you know, looking at the map, I mean, it's fairly extensive. You're talking about, you know, maybe some of your Crystal Lake areas are covered to some extent, but you know, one of the big issues is that Scott was mentioning for contamination is out in this area. So, you know, that's the goal is kind of figuring out some of the language to get this in here, and probably my zoning enforcement officer would love nothing more than to get the Sarah out of their hair. Sarah area.
Out of curiosity, the orange or yellow or whatever, I can't quite read the legend.
That's Class 3 groundwater recharge. So those are the areas that have been identified as providing recharge to areas with high quality aquatic resources in McHenry County that are all associated with major fens in the county. And I want to say we have 9 areas that are identified as Class 3 groundwater recharge areas. And right now, there's the Sarah and the Class 3 groundwater, I think, are intertwined with that UDO requirement. But that's why those are identified there, is because they are specific to groundwater recharge.
Thank you.
So I don't know with that, if anyone has any thoughts. I mean, I don't think some of the pre-treatment stuff is okay, but in terms of getting this into the SMO from a perspective of we need to maintain that groundwater recharge. So right now the UDO sits at a 50% threshold. You can't have impervious areas cover more than 50%, or if you have something like permeable pavers or something like that, like obviously that would be an acceptable design. So do we want to take a look at bringing this into the SMO, or is the feeling that, you know, it's okay where it's at and maybe municipalities cover it to a good enough degree? And I don't know that we can answer that latter part, and maybe that's something that staff can dig into to reach out to more of these municipalities to see if they have something in place.
I don't know who was all here in 13 when we looked at this, but wasn't the big pushback on the
Right.
chlorides?
Yeah,
So that's
and
gonna
so-
be the elephant in the room.
Well, and so this may actually be used to identify areas that won't be used for permeable paving. And I do also want to clarify that all of our soils actually provide recharge. All we're identifying here are the areas that provide high potential or moderately high potential for recharge. You know, I don't want to ignore everything else, but these areas have priority because they meet the top 2 tiers. But, you know, pollution is still, and water quality is still an issue every place else. Chlorides are a unique contaminant in that nothing filters them out. So with sediments and phosphorus, you know, we can use all different types of BMPs, from green infrastructure to you know, designed mechanical features. With chlorides, nothing removes it except reverse osmosis, and we can't reverse osmosis all of our groundwater. Chlorides really are a unique animal, and we have this as a resource, and then we actually have the 3D mapping, which I'd like to share with everybody at a later meeting, because we have 3-dimensional mapping for McHenry County. You can go onto our website, go anywhere in the county, run a transect line over your area of interest, and it'll pull up a profile view of the geology underneath that transect line. And so within seconds, you can see what is going on underground, and then you can look at it from different angles. So I'll typically look west to east, north to south, and then look diagonally, and you can really start to understand where the aquifers are and where the recharge for those aquifers are. This is a resource that's very unique to McHenry County. We're actually world famous for the 3-dimensional mapping that we have. And we can be using these resources to better understand where certain forms of green infrastructure could, should, or shouldn't be placed. So food for thought.
Is there a reason that the 50% coverage for projects or development in the SARA areas isn't already included in the SMO? Is it just because that makes it harder on people trying to develop in that area, or was there another reason why it wasn't included in the SMO but was included somewhere else?
Any insight on that, Adam?
I do.
I don't think we know that. For whatever reason, it was done in that manner, and because it was covered in the UDO, we just didn't want to do.
Because to me, it sounds like a good idea, but
we spent,
what are the reasons
we
why
spent
not?
multiple years looking at that runoff volume reduction, and it was really pointed at these areas so that you had treatment train, you're infiltrating where you can infiltrate, retain where you're retaining, and that wasn't approved by SMC, but we did spend a lot of time on it.
You know, you want to pre-treat all that water before it infiltrates down, but like you said, you require that basins infiltrate in terms of, you know, calculating their size and whatnot. Could you encourage more projects to pre-treat the water before it infiltrates down by maybe giving some sort of credit to like your runoff rate, you know, or your allowable release rate? So then it would reduce the size of the basin and more people maybe be, you know, like more agreeable. There's a lot of times like contractors would be like, oh, I don't want to install a new pre-treatment thing if I don't have to. And right now you're not requiring that basins utilize their infiltration in terms of like pre-treating, like you said.
I'm open to any suggestions, honestly. I just, at this point, I think it's roped into that water quality component, right? And we're looking at it as a little premature to really take any action on that. But this is an area that if everybody here feels like, hey, we need to provide a little bit more attention to these areas, then we could have a separate section that really expands on that. But really the focus of so I'm trying to tie it into that component, but really with this discussion item, I was more focused on trying to figure out kind of the idea of, instead of having that 50% number live in the UDO, to bring it into the SMO, or is it not 50%? Is it something a little bit different? And are there some extra components related to that?
So if you bring the 50% into the SMO and then make all of the municipalities adopt it, aren't you kind of limiting their development ability? And because then every property within a municipality that's shown in red there, you've then essentially told the municipality, who's then telling a potential developer coming in, that you can only put in 50% impervious on this piece of property.
Unless they meet other treatment requirements.
Yeah.
Or they go to like some kind of permeable pavement or something to allow for that recharge. That would be the idea behind this, and that's the question I'm also posing is, do we want to, because yes, by putting in the SMO, it would extend to the municipalities. Do we want to do that?
I mean, to Gabe's point a little bit and Darren's, I mean, one, is there any appetite from the SMC or communities, for this, as we wade into how much effort you guys as staff and as the TAC we want to put into this, if it's sort of a sunk cost, if you will. And then two, I mean, has anyone done an assessment on, municipal zoning ordinances to see what the impact of the 50%? I mean, if everyone's riding in the 75% range, and like you said, you're going back to your communities and saying, we're taking out 25% of your development potential, it's not, that directly, I doubt that obviously will be received particularly well. Not that it's not a potential issue to address, but I think there would need to be more nuance put to how you accomplish it, because on a large scale development perspective, permeable pavers, I mean, you're not gonna do permeable paver roadways in a subdivision, I mean, from a cost perspective, if nothing else. So, I mean, I think you need to kind of understand what the implications are for your municipalities to entertain what the next step is.
And that's why I did go to SMC. I wanted to come here first.
They were warning you when you go to SMC.
If I can't, if you guys are, and that was the whole idea, is I just kind of wanted to get the thoughts of what staff would need to look at to get better information for you to even make the consideration of kicking it up to SMC.
I mean, I think encouraging more infiltration practices within the sensitive recharge areas with, in particular, some level of pretreatment is a good solution and a good thing to pursue. But, especially, I think you even mentioned out of the gate, Stoyan, you didn't know where exactly the 50% came from. I guess I wouldn't be in support of just arbitrarily moving the UDO requirement over to the SMO and seeing if it'll pass. I mean, I think there's other ways, in particular, as we get into the water quality discussion and what that's gonna look like, there'll be other ways to encourage infiltration that may not have as dramatic of spatial impacts too.
No, that's why I said the 50%. I don't even know if we need it or it needs to be adjusted. And a lot of this does depend on how we want to handle the water quality, because if we are asking people to put in more infiltration in some of these areas, then it just can take care of itself potentially as well. So, but I think what we'll do is I'll reach out to some of the municipalities and kind of try to gauge some numbers or thoughts from them to see how a 50% number, or maybe where they see they're at within the ordinance, and just let you guys know where that's
I
at.
could even envision just a table of community by community and what they're.
I mean, you don't have to reach anywhere, I can tell you exactly what they'll answer, not no, hell no. So
Another concern or consideration, I guess, rather, is the UDO has land use authority. And the SMO, what we were told in Lake County is that there was no kind of land use authority that was passed into, the stormwater management groups. So by saying a 50%, then you're kind of wading into the land use criteria there. And so we tried to frame that and make sure we never cross that line, kind of when we were doing the work.
Okay.
So that's something to consider.
Well, I think with that point, then maybe what we'll do is we'll just put this to the side and see how we can potentially fit this information into water quality.
So what's the need? Is the need to infiltrate 50% of the rainfall?
No, the idea would be that these are the better areas for recharge. So if you pave over all of them, so take like the western half that's more rural. If you start to see a lot more development coming in and they're just paving over everything, you're losing that recharge. You're losing that groundwater resource, and so you're drawing down. There's less availability.
Right. So why wouldn't intent then to be to infiltrate what is currently existing through design instead of saying like a 50% rule, then you're actually trying to infiltrate through what our development is.
Yeah, get at it from an impact standpoint and criteria of how to achieve it rather than, you know, a perfect 50%.
I couldn't, I agree
And
100%.
that's a standard practice elsewhere, as you look at it, and you, excuse me, assess, you know, what's your annual average volume that you have to infiltrate back in the ground to try to offset or mitigate that, rather than worrying about how impervious or impervious the site can be.
Okay, I think that addresses it, unless.
No,
you have something? Okay.
I think that's.
Okay.
Can I just provide a little context?
Go ahead.
So just, I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but most of our municipalities get all or part of their water from our sand and gravel aquifers. So Woodstock is 100% sand and gravel aquifer. The city of McHenry, 100% sand and gravel aquifer. Crystal Lake gets part of their water from sand and gravel, part of it from deep bedrock aquifers, which are not sustainable. So more and more, we're going to have to rely on the sand and gravel. But we have over 22,000 private wells tapping into the sand and gravel or the limestone layer below that that's hydrologically connected with our sand and gravel. So that is our main water resource in the county. And so maintaining recharge to that, once again, is important both from a life perspective and an economic development perspective. And, you know, however we do it, I think it's a good idea to provide a pause or some opportunity to consider what the impacts are to the groundwater recharge. You know, what we have talked a lot about is, you know, if you have an industrial development going in an area of Sarah, I'm not saying you can't develop there, but what are the BMPs that should be implemented to protect water quality so that we're not sacrificing water for, you know, future generations from a single development. So, you know, I guess I'd like to at least throw that concept out there as we're considering, you know, how to utilize this information.
That was the main goal. So, I mean, ultimately, it sounds like we want to just promote more infiltration in those areas. So maybe would the group be more amenable to potentially an SMO amendment that discusses that in kind of point C, maybe a point C1 or you know, a point D that says that if you're in a Sarah area, you have to promote infiltration, something along those lines?
Yeah. And the Sarah areas would be both the red and the orange, or only the red?
It would be only the red area because that's the
Red area, okay. I was just curious.
Yeah, we'd have to look at those state regulations last three.
Going back to those RVR discussions, we need to make sure that we're trading clean water, not just infiltration.
Right.
Yeah, so that's why it would be tied into the pre-treatment that discusses you need pre-treatment for infiltration-based practices.
I mean, I think the tie-in here is really whatever the next stage of the water quality, you know, updates are. I mean, I think it's a clean connection, you know, between the two to just, you know, modify the language for the water quality to include Sarah language, and I think it covers both pretty easily.
Okay, so what I'll do then is as I'm preparing some of the updates to circle back to that, I'll include that as kind of a bullet point for you guys. Okay. All right, last order of business, sorry, this is going on, but one item that's been brought up to myself through our building division mostly is this certificate of occupancies and temporary certificate of occupancies. The majority of how the SMO is written doesn't tie directly to this. It's left it kind of open as an interpretation for a case-by-case basis. I'm not saying I want to move away from that. I think it warrants still case-by-case basis. But what it does is, for example, the language here for the example, it says that in order to be to qualify for the TCO, you can't have stockpiles present. You have to be at final grade. Seed and blanket straw not installed. So those are some kind of stormwater permit related components. What ends up happening is none of this is really present in the SMO. So we're constantly having to dedicate a lot of staff time in these type of discussions of, well, what are the requirements? I don't see it in the ordinance and that type of stuff. And so although we do have permit conditions that speak directly to, if you're gonna get certificate of occupancy, you need to be at final stabilization. You know, the kind of industry standard is 70%. Well, that's not really tied into the SMO. And so what we constantly find ourselves, not only staff in the field, but you know, myself having to have these long, extensive conversations with contractors without an ability to really say, hey, it's covered in the ordinance, look at section this, and you know, and outside of potentially some gray areas or some site-specific components, which I'm happy to discuss with people, it's just very burdensome to not have something in the SMO that would kind of help reduce that burden and move the process along a little bit more efficiently and provide clarity for any developers. Because I think that's the big thing that they see a lack of is, hey, I don't have a lot of clarity on this topic. So it was, you know, my question to all of you is, you know, the thought process would be to just have something, and because the way that it works is we get this request and then they would indicate, here's all the outstanding items that I have left. And if we've already developed a pattern of you gotta be at final grade and you gotta be at these conditions, does it make sense to put something into the ordinance that just helps have it in there a little bit more? Is it a definition of final stabilization? That would be helpful. So that's kind of where I'm at with this is staff battles this issue a lot. So staff would really appreciate it. But, you know, understanding that also the contractors, they're gonna wanna get in there as soon as possible. You know, we wanna find a working relationship with them to provide more clarity.
So you're looking for an SMO update that sort of codifies this, so going into permit issuance, people know what to expect?
Exactly. Here, like when we issue a permit, we issue conditions. Most of you've probably seen it. A lot of the conditions are pulled from the SMO. And when my building staff came to me, they're basically looking at, hey, I'm putting together my TCO and they're quoting certain parts of their ordinances. What can I say for the SMO? I was like, okay, let me take a look. And so I was driven to the one section here. Let me just find it. I apologize. I probably should have had it preloaded. Article 4, which basically talks about the permit conditions and terms and all of that, has this one section in here that I would think this would be appropriate for that. But it doesn't, like I said, there's no real, like, if someone potentially wanted to, they can say, well, that's your permit condition, but I don't see a 70% vegetation standard applied. And in the soil erosion control standards, it's there because if you have an exposed stockpile, you would stabilize it and those type of things. So when it comes to this TCO, to the temporary certificates and the certificates and final completion, yeah, I would look to just have like a quick, you know, for certificate of completion or final, you have to be at final stabilization. And maybe there's a definition added that says, here's what final stabilization means with 70% vegetation and, you know, you're at final grade, et cetera. If you're going for a temporary, here's where we'd like you to be at, with obviously some caveats, and that the enforcement officer still have the ability to take it at a case-by-case basis. If someone's on the edge of a river or creek, maybe some different considerations should be applied to that. But that's where, again, it says that I can add some special conditions, but it just doesn't, you know, define some of those for this particular purpose. And it's one of our constant pushbacks and discussion items that takes up a lot of time.
This might be a lack of my knowledge, but what does the temporary certificate of occupancy or whatever that was, what does that allow them to do?
Basically, I'll give you an example. Homeowner or contractor's building a house and it's November, but they basically have their site cut to grade and they are at a point where all life safety issues from a building perspective have been taken care of. So whatever kind of minor or other items they might have, they're looking to get the temporary certificates to outline what those minor items are. So it kind of locks them into a contract, if you will. But it also allows them to move into that home.
Okay. So it's like the...
So this is really single-family residences for the most part, because we don't really have certificate of occupancies for like a pole building for ag or something like that. That's not really a thing.
So a lot of the exterior and the building of the building is already done?
That's the goal. Yeah, that's the goal. And like I said,
Because with the 70% final stabilization, you know, that's, you know, how you are done with it. But if the temporary certificate for occupation, they go back and they have to disturb a bunch of that soil because they're still working on other parts of the building, then that doesn't work. But if they're already done with all the exterior stuff, then I think, yeah, meeting the 70% final stabilization is a perfectly acceptable thing to be a requirement to get this.
I mean, that's how we've been handling it, and specifically myself. So I have the inspectors go out, I take a look at what the site looks like. I try to make consideration of whether or not it's on a steep hill down to a neighbor or a water body or something like that, versus you're on 10 acres of ag in the middle. What would kind of final grade and the consideration of, do I want these people moving in, or is there still a lot of work to where the risk is if you give them the key, probably not pulling them out again, or it's gonna be a really bad look. But are there still improvements that need to be made that could impact a neighbor, or just site work in general that's never gonna get completed?
Yeah, I would say as long as earth disturbing activities are done on the outside, you know, they're done making a mess outside, that the 70% final stabilization and removal of temporary controls, I would say those two are good requirements.
What you're trying to close the gap on, right, is the grade that you guys encounter. So I mean, if you have the opportunity as, you know, essentially the enforcement officer for the county to issue special conditions, I mean, in lieu of a WMO update at this time, which we're probably gonna be going through for the MS4 stuff, I mean, can you just develop a standard special condition that just goes on all of your single family home permits that just says, here's what final stabilization is?
Yes, but the drawback is, where's my teeth to that?
I mean, it's in the permit condition at that point, right?
So if they're moving in
Yes and
November
no.
though, if they're moving in at the beginning of winter, they're not gonna be able to get that though, right?
Yeah.
That's what you're saying?
Not be.
Well, so the special conditions I might add is for the purpose of granting the permit. So at this point, I've granted it, so I'm beyond that point. I've already, you know, and I guess it's hard to throw a condition at someone, because they might be complete, they might not even need the TCO. It just depends. So if I throw in a blanket TCO condition in there, I don't know, it might not work for that particular project, because it's a case-by-case perspective. So I'm trying not to be so prescriptive, because it's case-by-case. But if we have an application for it, and we're indicating, hey, you need to have these items completed, I'm lacking teeth because it's not covered anywhere in the SMO potentially. And I suppose I could start adding it as a special condition for the permit, but it just, that's where I don't know what the happy medium is. And it's just my building division coming to me and just saying, hey, this lacks a little bit of teeth. And again, if I make it a special condition as part of the permit, I'm still probably gonna get the phone call from the contractor. But that's where they're looking at me and like, well, you're making this judgment call and why are you making it? And you treated this other guy differently even though I potentially didn't. I'm looking to potentially trying to avoid that, to give more clarity. But I guess if I'm consistent and I have the same condition for every single permit, then maybe it eliminates that.
So have you thought about using deposits? So financial deposit. So that is a good hook that will get a lot of compliance. If you just said, hey, to get the TCO, you need a $300 deposit, and when this condition is met on the backside of whatever time frame, you get it back.
I don't think I've ever had those discussions.
No, we haven't. Never really pursued, because we just hold our ground and don't let them in until, I mean, that's truly we have all the leverage in the world at that point until we give it up, but.
Keep doing. We do bonding when we do the permits at the MCDOT, and it is the pits. When we have to go collect, number one, you start the threats, okay, we're gonna collect on your bond. Well, it's like your aunt running around with a wooden spoon saying they're gonna hit you. They won't. They love you too much. So it's like, yeah. And when you do, oh my God, you're the worst person in the world, and how dare you? And now to work with that bond, now you gotta find a contractor that'll do it for that.
Right.
And you're working on someone else's project, and I don't recommend going down the bond route, so don't do it. Just don't do it.
And I'm not saying we need to make a change, it's just something that we battle on a day-to-day basis. I'm not saying it's not a good result, it's just, I would love to find a way to try to simplify that and provide some clarity and eliminate some of those discussions.
I agree on the bonds. I was just actually suggesting like a cash deposit. It takes a little more administrative work, but it would up your compliance if you're just talking about residential properties,
For the most part,
then you don't want to make it too high that somebody, can't afford it, but you want to make it enough that they'll remember it. Say, oh yeah, I need to do that to get my $300 or whatever, $500 back.
You just want to come up with a list of items and then we can kind of look at it.
Yeah, if you guys want, I can, give you what I battle with on a consistent basis, and because that was my other thought. If I'm consistently saying here's what I want, why not just have it clearly spelled out some way, whether it's in a definition format or just a quick for a TCO, A, B, C, and D type of component. So why don't I do that? But I wanted to see if I mean,
if it's something you've been fighting with, why don't we try to codify it and see if that helps? At least you can point to the ordinance then.
And if there's a way that we could, because some, communities obviously have different TCO requirements related to certain things, is there a way to like exclude them from having to follow the list, or make it clear that it's kind of just the unincorporated that's following this, or?
Yeah, I think so.
The only permits they issue are for unincorporated.
No, but this is gonna be adopted by everybody.
Oh, by the stormwater, oh.
If it's in, if it's in the SMO, everybody has to follow it,
I'll add
so.
another layer. I mean, this is, right, it would only be for the immediate effect, and the reason this is, the cause for concern came from issuing permits in the unincorporated portions. And that was, one of the concerns that we kind of had a little discussion about, is now to blanket that out. Everyone's gonna be on they're gonna have different house types, they're gonna have different building types, and they're gonna have much different building codes. Right now, we do and have been leveraging the building code for this particular issue.
Right.
That said, if this particular issue is an issue, there's always something else in the building code that you can use for a citation going forward if there's whatever might break down. So this, I would say, and it was kind of buried in what we were talking about initially in this presentation, was those definitions that would give you the leverage to better define or take a step towards defining what certain aspects of that project look like but it can't go too far to define everything because of just what you said, it's a site by site, and then every municipality is gonna be different. So I think every enforcement officer still needs to have that ability to make a subjective opinion based on certain objective basis.
Yep, I agree, yeah, so if we can just somehow get that into the language when we.
Heck that up.
So, and if you could do that.
Well, I think what I'll do maybe is, just again, come up with a list for all of you, and maybe it's just, stabilization is a common word within the SMO, and maybe it's just putting a quick definition in there, that if a certain contractor has a problem, okay, here's how we define stabilization, and can give them clarity on the front end. And my guys in the field, they try to stress, here's kind of what we look at, and it potentially would change from site to site. So just having a little bit more teeth to that is really kind of the request to limit that back and forth and that time needed to explain everything. And I'm sure I'm still gonna get those guys calling because they're gonna try. But at least it makes it a more efficient conversation on my end.
Stone,
Yeah.
it does also hit commercial. I mean, you mentioned it within this document, and Oregonix is a perfect example.
Yeah.
Don't roll your eyes. Yeah, I know we have the same feeling on that. But we have an Oregonix jar at the DOT, and if you mention the word, you have to drop in $1. So we have that. You may want to do it. But so do consider the commercial too, not just residential. And the only point is on that second solid bullet, you make note of fire district approval on commercial. I think you should get it for both, for any of them. You have to have the fire district approval because not just commercial, even if you want to do it on any of them, including ag, because you want that just from a liability standpoint, so you don't get somebody hurt out there and then it's like, well, you didn't ask the fire department if they could get there. Just a comment.
Yeah, I would like to put something in there that would be just generality for stabilization. Yeah, it doesn't matter if you're single family residence or commercial. And I don't treat them differently. I just look at it as a site by site case and go from there and try to work with the individuals. For commercial, you're probably having to do detention basin, and I need a as-built completed for that. So there's other components and triggers, but that was kind of the thing we've been grappling with, is just trying to, I would say I would prefer almost a definition addition within this, that might help close that gap. So, and it sounds like that's where everyone's, to Mike's point, I don't, want to go cash deposit, but I do want to at least provide some clarity and indicate that, we want things done at the same time, so. Okay, member comments, future topics?
Could I make an elevator pitch?
I suppose, I don't know. It's meant for members, but if the chairman will allow it.
So I was just going to announce every year we have our annual water forum for McHenry County. Every year we choose a different topic related to water and bring in experts to speak on it. This year our focus is actually going to be stormwater, so it's germane to this meeting. The theme that we're working towards is stormwater, sometimes too much, sometimes too little, and how do we plan to get it right? So I'll be giving a presentation on the MS4 and water quality. Trent Ford, the state climatologist, will give a presentation. And I'm still looking for a third speaker. So if you have somebody that you think would be a great speaker on a stormwater related topic, please reach out to me. And then the elevator pitch of it is every year we ask for sponsors. So I've got $2,000 to help with food, so we have it fully catered to make it a festive event. But we do need additional sponsors, and you get an 8-foot table, for the first hour of the program. So think about it. Reach out to me if you know of really good speakers, or if you want to be sponsors of this year's water forum. Please reach out to me.
And the date, time, and location?
We're thinking, good point. So we're thinking September 11th. So we typically hold it the second Wednesday of September. That Wednesday is a day that there are no county board meetings, no village or city council meetings, no township meetings, so the least excuses for elected officials not to participate. So we're looking at September 11th, and we hold it from 5:30 to 8. So the first hour is open for people to network, go to tables, and eat delicious food from Duke's Ale House. Then we have presentations till 8 o'clock.
At MCC.
At MCC.
Do you have a flyer or a link that you could, do you have a flyer or a link?
I will be putting something out. I just got my second speaker, so now that we're getting things solidified, I'll put out like a save the date notice, get that out.
Any other comments?
Yeah, motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
We're adjourned. All in favor?
All right.